To call this meeting to order. Today is Monday, July 25th, 2022. This is the Superintendent's Workshop. Calling the meeting to order at exactly 12 noon p.m. The purpose of today is for us to hear from the Superintendent of all the things that he'd like to bring before the board. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope everyone had a wonderful and relaxing summer, and we are here to kick off the 22-23 school year, and no better way to do that than talk about the tentative budget for this upcoming school year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fagan for his presentation.
Thank you. So through the board, through the chair, through the board. Yes, today we want to talk a little bit about the 22-23 tentative budget, but before I start, I need to give some acknowledgments to the staff in the finance department. Sitting to my left is Mrs. Kim Coltman. She's been here since 1998. She started out in high school working for the district in 88, sorry.
Okay.
88. Been here 34 years. I have another 7 members who total years of experience with the district is approximately 115. Total work experience, professional years is over 180 years. Without them and their dedication and their hard work to this work would not get done. It would not be as accurate as it is. Going into the budget, originally when the fourth calc came out, we were expected to get about $6.7 additional dollars. When the second calc came out, that jumped up to an additional $1 million, so to about 8.9 or basically $8 million. But as you already know, there are several items that have been earmarked for that $8 million. You have an increase in teacher salary allocation of approximately 1.3. So of the money they give us, they've earmarked and mandated it to be spent. You've got negotiated salaries and performance pay of approximately $1.8 million. FRS increase that'll cost the district approximately another $1 million. Family empowerment last year was $3.6 million. When the second calc came up, that's going to be approximately $4.6 million. So that's going to cost the district another $1 million to $1.5 million to budget for. Insurance for casualty and health is approximately $1 million. Charter schools, of course, get their proportionate share. That's about $600,000. Energy, price of gas, electricity, other stuff is going up as well. Contractors feeling the pinch, so their contract CPI and et cetera. All in all, no matter which number you look at, we'll basically probably break even. So all the money we receive from the state has pretty much already been earmarked. There were trim advertisements were posted on the 22nd, Friday, in that there was 3 ads: the tentative budget, the proposed tax increase, and the capital outlay. As originally mentioned, the tax proposal increase had a percentage of 17%. That was before the second calc came out. The actual percentage increase is only 6%, not 17%. That was the final document we were waiting on. Overall, your millage is going up approximately 5% or 0.238. School taxable values are $25 billion. This is an increase of $3.9 billion in 1 year. That's approximately 17%. Your prior year's increase in property taxes is somewhere between the 4, 5, and 6% range. So in 1 year, you went from basically 6% to 18%. Total amount to be levied tonight with the 2 resolutions that you will be approving tonight is approximately $148 million. Total budget is approximately $361 million. Impact to the average homeowner, depending upon their home, their assessed value, any exemptions they have, any exemptions that are allowed out there based upon the mandatory rates that we're required to assess. A homeowner could see somewhere with a $250,000 home could probably see 4%, maybe $60,000. Depending upon some other ones, you could probably see as high as $108 for the year. All depending upon their assessed values, their exemptions, and et cetera. Keep in mind, the only thing we're assessing an increase of, which is really a decrease, we're assessing the required local millage, which is required by the state. It actually is a decrease of 5%, but because of the property values, which increases your assessed values, your property taxes will go up. So we're not imposing anything more than what's required, and actually our rate is actually lower than the prior year. To recap, the 18th, you approved the trim ads. They were published on the 22nd. Today, we'll have the hearing on the first public hearing on the millage rates. On September 8th, you'll have the final budget hearing and on budget rates, millage rates, and total budget. Some high points. We ended the year at June 30th, 2022 with a $20 million fund balance. This is compared to $25 million in the prior year. This decline was planned. It was planned because of the additional academic services provided to schools, the additional teachers, the 8-period day. We also allocated more teachers through SAM in order to give the schools more resources to assist with regaining those learning losses because of COVID. When we go into 22-23, some additional items we did add 10 behavior techs funded by IDA. The FTE is aligned with actual FTE earned from the prior year. We added 5 security monitors at the high schools, 8 at the middle schools, and of course, we returned to the 7-period day. ESSER money. ESSER 1 and 2, 99% has pretty much been expended and collected. Of ESSER 3, we collected $5.2 million in the prior year, so we have the balance of $26 million to collect over the next year. That ends my presentation. I'll pause and answer any questions.
All right, board members. So we're not going to go through this entire book then to ask questions, only if we have
Yes, ma'am.
something that we found.
Absolutely, just if you ask some
Okay.
questions.
All right, well, get ready. All right, who would like to go first? Mr. Barefoot.
I just have one question. The decrease from 25 to 20?
Yes, sir.
What's your expectation going forward?
In the ESSER money?
Specifically, is it going to continue to?
Oh, in the property values? No, in the fund balance.
Fund balance, I'm sorry.
In the fund balance, no. We want to try and maintain somewhere between $18 and $20 million moving forward. Yes.
Okay, Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, my only question also related to the fund balance. First off, thank you. The evolution of this book and how it gets, how it's categorized, how it's color-coded, how it's organized, has really evolved in the last 4 years. Since I've been here, making it far easier to read, to go to specific places, so thank you all for your work on that.
Thank you.
You said the 20 million balance. Can you just say what percent that is?
Based on last year's revenue, it was 17%.
17%, which far exceeds our mandatory or our board mandated 5% balance, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am. Your 5% is a budgeted requirement to have at the beginning of the year. By state law, you've got to have at least 3% at the end of the year.
And we have 17 now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so is that, in the past, we've had conversations about how much we hold in the balance and for what reasons, and I know those are one-time only funds, but is it our intention to maintain such a high percentage balance, and why?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. You want to maintain that high fund balance primarily because, one, it gives you that cushion. If you do have a one-time expenditure that you need to buy, you can purchase it. Number two, it definitely assists with your bond ratings. If the bond rating companies feel that you are overspending your funding versus your expenditures, your bond ratings will come down. That ending fund balance shows them, one, that you've contained your expenditures and you're maintaining your revenue.
Thank you, that's all.
Okay, Dr. Jones?
Again, thank you, Mr. Fagan, Ms. Copeman, the whole department. I really like that our budget is really focused on our strategic plan and guiding principles. I think it's important to know where we put the money. And as Mr. Fagan said, or is in our book, about 85% goes to salary, so we kind of go from there on what we have. And thank you for saying what the taxes would be on individual homes regarding their property value. Mr. Fagan, when you look at our debt and you look at the capital money that we're using to pay our debt, what percentage of capital are we now using for debt?
Through the chair, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but approximately $12 million is coming out of your capital. Your total right now is about $37 million.
Okay.
So that now, over the next 4 years, that debt will slowly go down.
Right.
And in 5 years, the only debt you'll have is a small qualified school construction bond, which goes out to 2039, I believe. So the bulk of your debt will be paid off within the next 5 years.
Okay. When we look at budget and what we have for our schools, and obviously we had Ms. Bieber help all of our schools with their master schedule. I guess Dr. Moore or Ms. Baser, when we look at master schedules, how are we going to be in the core classes, and what will our electives look like with numbers or opportunities?
Through the chair, I'll take that. So we will be at class size. So for the last several years, we've been significantly under class size, more so in our secondary schools. We'll be at class size and hold true to that. We will continue to protect that ratio in the core. You're going to see a better balance as well with the 7-period day going back into effect in our elective courses. So we have done a great deal of work, as you just referenced, in order to ensure that we have students sitting in the right seats with the right teacher, and the instruction that is being provided is aligned to the standards in which we're obligated to teach in order to ensure that we've maximized outcomes. So I cannot say or give enough praise to the work that's been done by our school site leaders, Ms. Basur and her team, and creation of master schedules that are in the best interest of children.
And this relates to this, a little follow-up with master schedule. Mr. Bass, do you know where we are on how many teachers still need to be hired?
Through the chair, it was 43 Friday.
Okay, all righty. And just a note on this, the behavior techs that were trained to help in our ESE classes, I think is wonderful. Adding more security monitors, obviously to middle and high. And Dr. Moore, can you just tell us what they will be doing and why you thought it was necessary at our schools?
Through the chair, it's looking at what are we honoring everyone's time? And the reality is, based from feedback from students, through my superintendent student council, from listening to our school site administrators, and looking at how they're spending their time. So having individuals who are able to move throughout the school day to assist with arrival, assist with dismissal. As you know, we are moving our teachers to a 7.5-hour day. And we want to spend every single free moment that they have planning. We want to protect planning for those individuals. These individuals can assist with those procedures. They could be supervising lunch, significantly more eyes moving throughout the day. That frees up administrators to be in classrooms, to be the instructional leaders in which they have been charged to be.
Thank you very much. That's all for now, Ms. Berenborg.
Okay, Ms. Rosario.
Yes, thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And I will agree on the evolution of the entirety of the budget process. When I first came on, and two other board members can attest to, we had a very detailed page-by-page, line-by-line introduction and kind of discussion that ended, it was over a few days, to really digest and understand this as board members. That has changed quite a bit. Now it's only if you have questions, then ask. I'd like for us in the future to kind of think about whether that might be something good to do. It was helpful for me as a new board member coming on, so I just thought I'd mention that again for the future, or maybe even when we're ready to approve the budget. I will say that the strategic plan, creating this the way that we see it now, the pie chart on page 13 of 448, it really shows us that we are just a little less than 0.5% with regard to our focus on academic success. So I appreciate the way that this is now aligned, where we can see that the strategic plan drives the budget, not the other way around. It's not like we're creating the budget and then saying, oh, and by the way, we have this plan, and we're going to try to fit the plan into the budget. So now the way that a novice might read it, they can clearly see that this is the priority. And so I would like to see more in academic success, but I think that the formatting of this is definitely more understandable, I suppose. I have a question about the trim notices. So I requested the trim notices, but I requested it too late, so I apologize for that. The trim notice that went into the paper last week, the notice of proposed tax increase, can you talk a little bit about, there was a concern with regard to charter schools not being on that trim notice. And then what I wanted to see with the previous trim notices, because it's not, that trim notice is not in this book, the one from last week. So this book was created before and printed before the trim notice went into the paper, which I understand. But previous books do not have that trim notice online, so that's why I asked for it in email today. Can you talk a little bit about the charter school role, participation, our responsibility to the charters with regard to tax notices, increases, where they fit within our budget? I do see They are on our report to the community for fiscal year 2020, 2021. And what is allocated to them on the bottom is just like a summary report that you gave us. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, if you don't mind, and explain that part and portion of it so that we can be clear what happened with that ad.
Sure, through the chair, to the board. We'll start with your last document. That report to the community is a report of expenditures,
Okay.
which is true. Charters do get a proportionate share of the critical millage. Going back to the trim ads are governed by the state of Florida and the Department of Revenue. You're not allowed to change any wording in those ads unless it refers to the numbers, the dates, the years, and et cetera. Charter schools cannot be mentioned in that. And the reason why charter schools are not mentioned in that is because the school district is the taxing authority. We're the only ones who can levy. Charter schools cannot. Charter schools are entitled to a percentage or proportionate share based on Florida statute in their contract, in which case we do appropriate them in the budget. I believe what the confusion was is that in a few years ago, Florida statute changed and charter schools were required and were eligible to get a proportionate share of the 1.5 mils. And that was paid out in 1 year. After that year, the state of Florida has continued to pay that directly to the charter schools without having to tax or take any from our 1.5 mils. That may have been where the confusion was, that the charter school says, well, if I'm supposed to get some of this money, then why am I not in the ad? You can't be in the ad because it's not governed by Department of Revenue. Number two, if you are supposed to get the money through Florida statute, we will appropriate and expend the money through Florida statute. It has nothing to do with the ad. They are two separate vehicles.
So they get a proportion of the FTE.
Yes.
They get their portion of the FTE, and we are contractually, legally obligated to provide for them their portion of the FTE. We are
Sure.
not, what I'm understanding is we are not required to provide for them the portion of the millage because the state directly sends it to now. The state now directly sends it to the charters. Is that
Through the chair. Only the capital outlay millage, the 1.5 mils.
only the capital outlay millage?
They
Okay.
still get their percentage of the critical millage and everything else. Just
So
the
they're
1.5
still getting the, okay.
comes to the state.
Okay, so thank you.
Yes.
I know that there was some confusion in the community over that, so I'd still like to see the previous ads, so we can compare and make sure that it wasn't in previous, because I think the concern was, we were mentioned in previous ads, so I just want to kind of be sure that that wasn't the case. I also had a question about the, let me see if I could go back. The ESSER 3. I know that we were approved for about 30 million, and I think I heard you just mention the balance of the 26 million will be collected over the next year. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Through the chair. The grant goes for the next 2 years. Whatever we can expend and collect, we will collect as much as we can to expend all dollars as fast as possible.
So we don't have those funds currently?
Through the chair, you have to spend the funds first and then you get reimbursed.
Oh, okay,
So you just, kind of like you have a grant, once you spend it, you submit the claim, they'll pay you back.
okay. And the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds are complete, do we have a balance on the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds?
Through the chair, extremely small amount, less than 0.5% of 1%.
Okay. And then so what are the plans moving forward for the ESSER 3 funds? And the interesting part here, I mean, I've mentioned this before, it's not new. The concern that I have is that the board and the community are not having a direct input on what those funds could be used for. The ESSER 3 funds, for those who are watching and listening, in real layman's terms, it was money that was granted to the schools during COVID, during the pandemic, correct me if I'm wrong, during COVID, and to sustain and keep schools open. And then we could use those funds for anything to say that we were indeed keeping schools open and keeping students safe from the pandemic. Now we have ESSER 3, which I don't think a lot of people thought we would receive post-pandemic, of $30 million, right?
Correct.
Of $30 million. And so what are we using it for? Which is a great thing, but what are we going to, what I don't want to do is I don't want to just put it into salaries that we can't sustain long-term over time. I don't want to waste it just because we have it. I want to be able to strategize and hear from the public as what other districts have done. They have had town hall meetings, they have had open, open forums, just to kind of do the review of what ESSER is, and then here is the balance, what could we use it for, what are the needs in the community? So have we, yes, I see
go
you're
ahead.
ready.
No, I'm just-
No, go ahead, I'm done.
On page 174 of the budget book, you'll see a narrative of all three of the ESSERs. ESSER 3 is approximately $30 million. We expended $5.2 million in the prior year. The balance that's left is $1.5 million to buy additional computers and technology requirements for the district. $14 million is for mental health services and academic support in the form of counselor support services and et cetera. We got approximately $1.5 million to replace HVA systems throughout the district. $1.4 million is for summer school learning, $4.3 million for your next two textbook adoptions, and approximately $1.1 million in drug costs. The primary focus of the application that was filled out for ESSER was to utilize the current expenditures that the district has for ongoing support, increase those, which is what we did last year with your 8-period day, your supplements to teachers to work their planning periods, and also the additional teachers that were allocated in last year's. All of that was part of your ESSER 2 and 3. That's why $5.2 million got moved into prior year, in order to give those students in those schools the academic support they need in order to get those gains. The point for next year and the next 2 years is the same. What we can spend the funds on is legally anything that we do in the schools in order to enhance academic performance. The main objective is to use federal funds first, general funds second. Build up the fund balance and maintain that fund balance moving forward.
Yeah, I still think that we need to open it up to the community. I still think we need public input to hear from the taxpayers where they see a need, rather than it be told to us what it's going to be used for. I don't think that we have had much engagement in that communication. So I don't know how board members feel about that, but it is taxpayer money, and it is, it's a grant, rather, and it's certainly something that I think that we should look deeper into.
Yes, ma'am.
Provide more opportunities. I also think that you mentioned the fund balance, whatever is left over goes into the fund balance, or keeping the fund balance high. What was mentioned previously with the 3% and the 5% and why there is a high fund balance in there, though I don't disagree that we should have a high fund balance to ensure our bond ratings are, where they need to be, and so on and so forth. We have a policy that says, we have a statute that says that we're supposed to have a 3% of our budget in there, right? We have a policy that says we're supposed to have 5%. So that kind of gives us a little bit of cushion to make sure that we don't go below the 5%, to ensure that we have some funds there, right? But what we don't have is a ceiling. We don't have a cap on how much is too much to keep in our fund balance. Am I wrong? Do we not have?
Through the chair, no, ma'am, and I would love to be in a position where I tell you there's a 50% fund balance of $75 million. What would you like to do with it as one-time money, or
Yeah.
what would be your slow burn-down rate? It's one of those things that have never come to pass, and therefore, great problem to have. Don't want to talk about it because it'd be a while before we ever get there.
Yeah, it dawned on me that, if we keep, like, let's say, if we get 26 million in one shot from ESSER, if it sits in the fund balance, just hypothetically speaking, not that that's going to happen, at what point do we say too much is too much? We receive the funds to use them. We don't receive the funds to sit on them. But then at the same time, we might have a recession, or we might have issues with our, in our economy with inflation. So, it's kind of like, what do you do? Where do you put your priorities? And I suppose that's the responsibility of the board to make the decision on the budget on that. So that I think board members, it would be really prudent for us to continue to have these conversations. Mr. Fagan?
So, the chair, you bring up a very good point. One option that I did not mention just a minute ago, and that is Another reason to have a good fund balance is you know that our funding comes from the state, and sometimes that can be a little bit fluctuating. So if you have a $100 million budget and you roll $20 million, and they give you another $100 million, you're pretty good. You can spend some of that $20 million one time. But if they come in and say, I'm only going to fund you 80, well, now you need all that 20 just to balance your budget. And now
Right.
you have nothing in reserve. So because our revenue is not fixed and standard to where you can always count on A, B, and C, that extra funding source helps for you in case the state does come in and cut you, or does cut maybe a program that you have utilized and you want to keep, and now you got to figure out something to do in the next couple of years, but at least it keeps that funding going for the next couple of years. But it was a
Yeah.
very good point. Yes, if they
I
do.
get it. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, couple things. Thank you for bringing up the trim ads, so I wanted to make sure that's clear, that people understand about what that is. If you send the former trim ads to one
Yes.
board member, please send them
Yes.
to all. Thank you. I asked a question of you this week that I'd like to bring up now, because I can't speak to other board members, so they don't know, but I did meet with some band boosters and some orchestra people this last week or so about some concerns they had in the budget, and noticed that there wasn't really a line item for performing arts. And so I asked you about that. And I understand that now there is some money, $150,000, that's going to be divided up between the different fine arts, performing arts groups. Could you expand on that?
Yes, through the chair. Midway through the year, we met with the band directors and Kelly Shore, and were seeking to see what kind of needs they needed. And their funding has been very volatile.
Very what? I'm sorry.
Volatile.
Okay,
One year they
volatile.
might get 350,000, next year they got 50, next year they got 100, maybe the following year they got 0. So we met with them and asked them to give us, what do you need? What's out there, what's broke, what's your wish list? Wish list came back about $300,000. He said, well, that might be a little tough in the first year. What do you really need? So we originally said, okay, we can probably guarantee 50,000 for sure, but this is in the beginning stages of the budget. Let's see what we can do later on when we get done. When the budget was done, there's $150,000 allocated for this year between the secondary and the middle schools for performing arts. We've asked them to give us a list of how they want to spend it, and we want to use that as a guide building the next year's budgets next year and the following year, to maintain that level, but not to underfund, but not to overfund too much at the same time. So it's kind of a new line item in the budget for capital that we want to not have these peaks and valleys, but we want a pretty much a steady flow of revenue in there so that they can buy what they need when they need it.
Okay, so that's capital money.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
So that means it could be used on repair of instruments, purchasing instruments, I don't know about uniforms.
Yes.
But music. So that is something that a principal can make a decision, like with curriculum instruction money or discretionary funds,
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
transportation to events that they have to attend, not extra events, things like that. And, you know, I think also building principals, I'm learning, they probably could use your support in really understanding their budget and how to be creative with it. I learned that when I was a principal, sitting down with my CFO, is show me where I can purchase instruments, show me where I can purchase things like that. Because sometimes it's not very clear, but when you realize, okay, I can use capital money for that, that's great, then I know, okay, that's something I can take out of there. Purchasing music, to me, is like purchasing textbooks. So, you know, where are we going to come up with that money?
Through the chair, that would probably be a new project for next year, the non-capital items that the schools need for specific programs such as music. That does come out of the school's discretionary, in which case the schools have to balance between, do I buy music or do I do this?
Right.
It just would require some discussions next year to see what we can do.
I know, like, for example, as a coach, I had a booster club, and I know booster clubs help tremendously with these programs, which, you know, they probably need to because we can't afford to do a lot of it. However, if we're going to offer programs like that, we need to fund the basics. And so I had that concern that I couldn't find it in here. So I appreciate you telling me what you told me, and now publicly they know they have $150,000 in capital money. Okay, I appreciate that. The fund balance. Doesn't keeping a high fund balance keep us from having to go out for a tan?
To the chair. Yes, but no.
Okay, explain it.
If you do have a high fund balance, that means at the end of the year, you had revenues greater than expenditures, okay? But it doesn't mean I have cash flow. Cash flow means when I start the beginning of the year, such as we are right now, if my expenditures were higher than the prior year and I ended with $20 million in the beginning, what is my actual cash flow going out the door? Revenue minus expenditures is an accounting number. It just gives me a number at the end. Now we're talking cash flow. How much money do I have in the bank, and what do I have to pay?
So,
That tells me if before I get to November, before the $100 million hits,
Yeah.
am I going to be negative?
right.
So that's the difference. It tells you you have plenty of fund balance, but it may not necessarily be all 100% cash.
Okay, which brings me to the other. So every time we see kind of property values going up and we see more required local effort money, we know that money is going to not come until November.
Correct.
And if we get less money from the state, then we're in this position now that we have to worry about October, November paying salaries, correct?
Correct. And then and for 22, 23, you're down $1 million funding from the state.
That
That's over the
concerns
cour-
me.
That's through the course of the year. It's $1 million. It's not going to cripple us, but we're still looking at the cash flow right now to determine if a TAN is required.
Okay. Can you describe the difference between the 361 total budget and the 309 budget number that's being used also? We've got in the beginning of the book somewhere, total budget at the top, 309 on one of the pages. I want to say it was the page that was referenced earlier, page 58 maybe,
309.
or earlier. Not 58, sorry. You have 309 and the budget item number, and then I believe the 361 includes
timing?
all of the
I'm sorry.
project funds and the enterprise funds and all those other funds, correct?
Through the chair. Yes, ma'am. That's the timing difference between when the tentative budget and when the book was printed, when the tentative budget went out. And number two, this only includes appropriations. The tentative budget includes fund balances. So the big difference is your fund balances is not in the 309.
Okay,
It just shows appropriations.
right, because there's been some confusion out there about what our total budget is. Okay, so the last thing I have are specific pages. So if you go to page 58, where it says general textbook allocation FTE, I know with purchasing textbooks, you can roll over funds. And you've got this as a rollover fund from last year? So did we have money left over from purchasing ELA materials and we're going to move them to math or?
Page 58, the negative 32,000?
Yeah,
Yes, that's, again, preliminary budget. That's the anticipated roll. I expect that roll to probably be a little bit higher to cover that. So again, this is tentative budget versus final.
so my question is, are we okay for math purchasing?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, and also you have ESSER money set aside for purchasing of textbooks.
Well, that's important to say because here we are having to purchase textbooks, but we're using ESSER funds. Are we using that just because we want to protect our general fund or do we need to actually use ESSER funds to cover textbooks?
Through the chair, it's the best use of the funding available to use a federal source over a general
Okay.
source. And number two, if you did not have ESSER and your funding sources was limited, then you'd be looking to make some adjustments to be able to fund textbooks. Textbook is a big ticket item every year, and you have two choices. One, you got to start cutting every year and putting some away so you have that big ticket item. Or three, you hope something like ESSER comes in to help fund that.
Okay.
Can you, before you go on,
No,
Madam
I'm not
Chair-
done yet. Could I
Wait.
finish, please?
Yes,
Can you
I
take a
just,
note?
I'm asking you for the page where you were,
I just said it, page 58.
and what line?
It was on the rollover funds.
Very, very low at the bottom. Very low at the
Say it again?
bottom. At the very bottom,
Very bottom, yeah,
page 58.
okay. Can you go to 119, page 119? Okay, so under assessment, which is really important to look at because we're going from FSA to progress monitoring this year. So I'm looking at those numbers and the grand totals at the bottom where it says final budget book and tentative budget book. Is this due to progress monitoring? Explain to me about last year's look at how much we're spending on assessment and this year's look.
Through the chair, you're looking at the $80,000 decrease?
Right.
Okay. At the beginning of the year, you always have people that are moving between facilities. And so in this particular case, that 121,000 simply did not get put on that one line item. That person is being accounted for somewhere else.
So we're talking person, not,
Correct.
assessment.
Yes, that's a
I want to
salary.
make that very, I saw that, but I want to make it very clear that that's why that number looks
Yes,
like that.
it is the difference between tentative and final. Remember, we finish the year, we get the tentative book out, we will finish making some final adjustments, and these items like this will come out before the final. There
Okay.
was no decrease in assessments.
Thank you. Could you turn to page 122? And again, I know this is tentative budget still, but this is the time to bring these things up, so we can kind of make some adjustments if we need to. Okay. So I looked at this compared to years past, and definitely an increase in, especially, was it discretionary? And general non-discretionary salary. So under the salary, does that include the attorney, or is that just the executive secretary? Because that's 375.
Through the chair, well, that's only a $2,000 decrease.
No, I know, but what
Okay.
does that include? Whose salaries?
Through the chair, just the board and secretary.
Got it, okay. And then, legal fees project, could you explain that?
Through the chair, that's your outside counsel legal services.
Was that the attorney search that we did? That you
Ye-
see that on the last one was higher?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then the last one, discretionary. Is that from security? No, school security is separate. Is that cell phones? What is that?
Through the chair, anything and everything that's non-salary, cell phones, supplies, travel, et cetera.
Okay. Because we don't see a breakdown of what those items are unless, of course, we ask for them, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. If we wanted to see that kind of detail, the book would probably triple in size.
Okay, I understand. So as a principal, when you have your whole budget, you have a breakdown of everything.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
And you get a book similar to this, not
Correct.
maybe this size, but a pretty good sized book that tells you where you spent everything and where you plan to spend everything next year?
Through-
So
yes.
who does that for the school board?
Through the chair, one, you have a bookkeeper at every school. I have a team of people that go out and visit the bookkeeper and the principals. They go into Focus, they teach them how to use Focus, run the funds that they need, run the
Right.
reports to be able to see what they spent, where they're spending currently, and what they're projected to spend for the rest of the year.
Okay, so who is overseeing the spending of the school board office?
That would be the school board and the executive assistant, executive secretary.
But we don't get the breakdown like the principals get.
You would have it once we were to either meet with yourself or board secretary.
Okay, I think it would be probably good practice and transparency to put that out there.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, we can
Okay.
supply that.
I think it's only fair for the taxpayers to know what we're spending also, how we're spending money. And then the last one, 176. And thank you to those of you that were answering my question on this, but I caught something on page 176 that kind of bothered me. And I think you've got an answer for me, Mr. Bass. It was the breakfast price will increase for 25 cents for students and adults. The lunch price will increase 25 cents for grades K to 5, 50 cents for grades 6 to 12, and only 25 cents for adults. So could you explain why we're increasing for students by 50 cents, but we're only increasing for adults by 25?
Yes, ma'am, that was a typo.
Okay,
It
could
should,
you,
it's only 25%, 25 cents across the board for all categories.
so are these numbers correct at the bottom then?
The numbers at the bottom are correct.
So last year's,
It was
Price.
250 to it was 250, it's going up to 275.
okay.
I believe that was the number for 6
Correct.
through 12.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're being fair and we're not assessing kids more than we are adults.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's all I have for now. I'm sure when we get to final budget, lots of conversations between us on details. Anybody else? Yes, Ms. Rosario.
Yes, thank you. There were a couple of things that were mentioned here, and I'm probably going to work backwards. With the breakdown that you're going to provide us for the school board budget, can you also please provide that for the superintendent's office budget?
Through the
That'd
chair,
be
yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So that would be for those who are listening or watching, page 122 is the school board, and then page 123 is the superintendent budget. I had another question here. Let me make sure. The textbook, I think it was with the textbook. The point that was made there was actually pretty good in terms of and the performing arts in terms of where that money is coming from. So I don't know who decided that that schools would have to wait, or that this was created, and because this was created already, that they would have to wait until next year. We're in the tentative budget planning process now. So if we want, as a board, to collectively agree to edit this budget, to add performing arts now, we can do that now. We don't have to wait until next year. So we can charge you all with a reassessment or reevaluation to ensure that even with the ESSER 3 funds coming in, to use $300,000 of $24 million. I mean, if you look at the ESSER, I lost the page now because I was on the other page. That ESSER breakdown that you provided earlier. Oh, gosh.
Page 174.
74. That ESSER breakdown, sorry. That ESSER breakdown has $14 million. $14 million are allocated to mental health services and academic supports.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
$14 million for something of data that has not been provided to us.
To the chair, we can give you a copy of the ESSER application that will list any and all items, and I believe I may have already supplied that.
No, it was, what was provided for us was information that a committee decided that their priority would be on index cards. That was the data that was provided for. I'm talking about data that justifies $14 million worth of mental health services and academic supports.
Through the chair. The $14 million consists of, and I don't have that off the top of my head, guidance counselors, success coaches, math and reading coaches, various other positions that are in the district right now that provide direct support to the students, as well as your mental health counselors and et cetera. It's not $14,000 of more, because if it was $14,000 more, then
14
next year
million.
you'd have to cut $14 million.
Right, that's
So-
my
so-
concern.
so- Well, we're not doing that. I'm taking the $14 million I have today and moving it to ESSER. So the next year I move it back to general and the budget stays solid.
Well, let's not do that. Let's decrease this 300,000 and supply the schools with their wish list. That wish list for performing arts is really critical, especially for the schools that do incredible work with their performing arts. We've been to some of their performances, their audio equipment, their, you know, the lighting, the stage, you know, work, they need help. Painting even, I know that probably comes out of capital. You know, curtains probably comes out of capital, I'm not sure, but I would agree. I mean, I don't think that we should wait until next year. If this is an area that has not been provided a line item for, just readjust the ESSER 3, give it to them. I'm in full support of providing students and these schools with the performing arts materials that they need. Instruments, whatever it is that they need. It's $300,000 out of $30 million. It's probably a drop in the bucket.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, I can work up a proposal and submit it to the board for consideration.
Awesome.
Question, so how many people would lose jobs if you do that?
Through the chair, it depends on the amount of money. I wouldn't say they'd lose their job. It'd be a matter of just shifting funding from A to B. It'd take me a little time to figure that out. But it would be resubmitting an application. The application to DOE has been submitted. We'd have to submit an amendment, get it approval, and then have to backdate it. So it's just a little bit of a process.
Will you review again what is in that 14 million?
I don't have the details with me, but it would be your guidance counselors, support services, coaches, reading coaches, math coaches, basically anyone direct. These are all direct school-based positions that are at the schools that are directly touching students.
Dr. Moore, how would that affect our strategic plan?
Well, I think there's two things. The additional $150 $50,000 that's being capital goes into the capital plan, which is coming to the board in the coming months, which will go directly to the schools. The other point that's being made is really working with the allocation of funds, the discretionary funds that are available to school principals. Those of you who have sat in that seat, including college president, understand, the being to create a school site specific budget to make local decisions in order to prioritize where those funds are being spent. As the board chair was saying, there is significant opportunities now that we are not in crisis and going through the midst of a pandemic, really to work with principals to define what those priorities are in order to ensure that we meet the needs, the so many needs that are out there, specifically here talking about the performing arts and really looking at what is available, creating a priority. The truth of the reality is, we're never going to have enough money to do what we need to do. But I do know 100% when you look at the level of performing arts in this school system, it probably supersedes every other school system in the state of Florida. The commitment that this staff has and this board has as it relates to visual and performing arts is not wavering and will continue to be that high level of support. So in looking at that allocation, so that's the performing arts and ensuring that we're continuing to grow and honor that specific work. I think what we have in place is going to continue to move that forward and grow visual and performing arts, specifically band. To answer your question specifically, Dr. Jones, we have the ability to move money from ESSER to offset the general fund, and that is the science. So if we were to readjust it, ultimately we'd have to put it back into the general fund, in which we lose flexibility. I think the appropriate course of action is to look at what are one-time expenses that we could expend looking at ESSER. What are things in which we definitely need? What we were able to do with textbooks 2 years ago was significant. We were going to celebrate some of the outcomes that we had in our elementary schools. Make no mistakes about it. The quality content that we put in front of our children and the resources and the volume of development that we were able to purchase had a significant impact on a very statistically different outcome, being significantly better than compared districts. Looking at the volume of development that we've been able to provide, it is, in fact, significant. So really looking at where are the opportunities to enhance the district. Look at we are a one-to-one initiative district. We weren't a one-to-one district in terms of a device in every single hand of every single child in the school system. Without ESSER dollars, we were able to provide them immediately and then create a plan moving forward to right-size the budget to plan for. So when Mr. Fagan is talking about when we have to re-up for Amplify or another ELA curriculum in 4 years from now, we're saving for it now. When we have to re-up for mathematics in 5 years from now, or 6 years from now, we're saving for it now. So we've been able to right-size the budget and not spend 107% of the money, meaning you're spending 7% more than what you are receiving, but ultimately moving ourselves to where we're spending that 97, 98%. That's the work that Mr. Fagan and team have been able to lead over the course of the last 3 years. It is absolutely amazing that we've been able to right-size that, and then moving forward, we do have the opportunity to engage in dialogue with the board regarding what is the most efficient and effective use of those ESSER funds as we move forward.
And
Dr. Jones.
I too have met with a couple band directors and be meeting with parents next week. And obviously I know there's a difference between site-based budgeting and SAM, but I was able to give a lot more in my site-based budget to athletics and band. And, so that's something we need to take a look at. And I've also talked about, supplements. I don't think they've had a raise in a few years. So, we have a lot of people doing a lot of extra time that are there for our students, whether it's coaches, band directors, choral directors, drama, whatever. So I want to make sure that we continue to honor them and what they're doing with students. And actually, some of our band numbers have gone down in certain schools, and I'm concerned about that. So I know all of our parents are doing well with our booster groups and so forth. And one thing, I'll just put it out there, I would not do pay to participate as a principal. I just felt that, and I know our schools are doing it, and it's not a lot of money, but still we have a situation sometimes where a student doesn't even want to ask. And yes, every coach and band director will tell you, they will not eliminate a student if they cannot pay, and that is wonderful. But I think if you talk to principals, you'll see that they just can't give as much in their discretionary to band and athletics like they used to. So I just want us to continue to look at it. And I know they met with Mr. Fagan and Ms. Baser, and I appreciate that. And I know it went from 50 to 150,000, and I appreciate that. So, but let's just keep our eye on it, because as we all know, one of the best dropout prevention programs we have are our extracurriculars.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, a couple things. What, in so first off, I support the amount of money that we can give to mental health allocations. I think mental health is a crisis right now. I have heard it from parents, I've heard it from teachers, I've seen it in research, I've seen it on the news, and don't find that to be in question. In reallocating that money, I have two questions. One, is the question here or whether you are going to look at taking it specifically from mental health allocations, or whether you are looking from taking it from other places as well, and there's going to be some analysis on that. If that's true, what's the impact of that on the budget process, which we're now in July? Public hearing is tonight, I think. Public hearing is tonight. And what's the impact of that then on moving the budget forward?
Through the chair. The impact on tonight's tentative budget is no impact. You basically approve the tentative, we have to come back in September to approve the final. If we do the analysis and answer your first question, would it directly impact or would the funding come directly from the mental health? No, we would look at all the categories within ESSER 3 to say, where can I find this money? The next question is, the state has to approve this amendment. If I try and move band equipment into ESSER 3's grant, they may kick it back and say, no, that doesn't meet the requirements. So far, they've approved everything we've asked for, but you never know. So the first process would be, where can I take from? Not from mental health, maybe we take it from the HVAC work as an example. So I cut 150 out of HVAC work, add it into musical instruments, send the app to DOE, they approve or disapprove. If they disapprove, everything stays the same. Now I go back and look in general fund, either in capital or in general, say, where can I find this additional $150,000? That may be done before September, it may not be. I'm just saying, don't know the timing. But if it is found, we can always do it on budget amendment through the year to move that money. So there's no immediate impact on tonight nor September. We can handle this either before then or after then.
And so what I'm hearing is there's not an automatic presumption then that comes out of mental health money.
Correct. And it
Okay.
would not, Dr. Moore would not allow me to take it out. I would take it out of someplace less of an impact.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I want to make sure, I know you sent an email on July 27th about the impact of the trim on charters, and I want to make sure, I'm sure that was sent to all board members, correct? So we all received the email in response to the question about charters in the trim notice.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Just want to clarify that. I am curious, this is actually directly to Mrs. Rosario. You mentioned you want to create opportunities for more public impact public input into the budget. Can you tell me how you're thinking of doing that other than the budget hearings?
Not the
The
budget.
public hearings, which we have
No.
every year, and that's an opportunity for the public to give input into the budget?
Yeah, I've shared it before, not the entirety of the budget, just in ESSER funds with regard to ESSER funds.
Just ESSER funds?
So there's a, gosh, what is that website? What is that, Hillsborough County, Mr. Fagan?
Yes, ma'am. To the
So
chair.
Hillsborough County, if you go to Hillsborough County, second. I think it's hillsboroughcountyschools.org, and then you search ESSER there. They have an entire, and I've shared this publicly as well, and I've shared it privately with Mr. Fagan and Dr. Moore. They have an entire page or two on ESSER funds only to show the complete transparency with their district, what each one is, what it's for, when it was assigned, when the funds are supposed to sunset, and then there are some training videos, if you want to call them training. There are some training videos that kind of explain the ESSER in more understandable terms for the community. But they did have and held town hall meetings to talk specifically about ESSER, and they did that during the pandemic. They did it, I think, a few times, just to receive some feedback from the community as to what the priorities should be. They have a presentation up there as well, ESSER funds presentation, and then some of the feedback that they received from the community during these town hall meetings. They were town hall meetings. During these town hall meetings, that information was then applied to wherever they use their ESSER funds. So that's the kind of not done. Some other districts I know have done it. Their website is really, really clear. It's user-friendly. You're more than welcome to take a look at it there. So that's what I was thinking about with regard to the budget. And even if it was with regard to the entire budget, I mean, the entire budget is not our own. We should be welcoming to receive community feedback on it. But my particular comment was just specifically with regard to ESSER.
Okay.
And obviously, I'm sorry, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 is done, but now that we're still in the process and in the middle of ESSER 3, that's what I've been talking about.
As I understand it, for ESSER 3, we have to submit to, before receiving those monies, we have to submit to the state what we're going to spend them on before we can receive those funds, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. Application has to be submitted and approved. Once it's approved, then we can begin expending funds.
And that application was already submitted, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Some time ago, as I recall, wasn't it?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
And we're still waiting on those funds, correct?
Well, excuse, through the chair, the grant has been approved, i.e. the $5.2 million we were able to recoup from last year. So the grant's been approved, so as we spend the funding, we get to pull the funds back, pull the funds down. So right now, the grant's been approved as is, and as we spend the money, we'll get reimbursed.
Then we'll draw it down, okay.
Correct.
Okay. What is the impact then of changing any of that?
Have to go through the amendment
We have to go
process.
through the whole process. They may or may not approve. If they don't
Correct.
approve, it reverts. If they don't approve, does that mean that they could decide not to allocate the money?
To the chair, no, ma'am. We would basically rescind the amendment, and the funds would stay where they were before we submitted the application.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Barefoot.
I would just add, it seems to me that there's built-in controls. It's not as if you can do whatever you want. The amount of money's fixed. You make an executive decision as to what to spend it on. You haven't spent it yet. You get approval to spend it. And once you've spent it, you get reimbursed for whatever you've been approved to spend. So the process that's in place seems to work pretty well. And you need I use the word management, needs the flexibility to be able to, after the fact, move money around as the need arises. And as long as there's a process specific to the ESSER funds, as long as there's a process that you can't do whatever you want without the state signing off on it, it seems to me that the system that's in place now works pretty well.
To the chair, yes, sir.
And if any other dollars, I mean, the money's fungible. As long as there's a process that you go through and you make a decision based on need that may be different 3 months from now than when you put the budget in place from a line item standpoint, you have the flexibility to do that. Most businesses on a quarterly basis will provide the changes in the line items, and if there's a question as to the reason why, they're usually a footnote. Pretty straightforward manner in which finances are run. This is a business funded by the taxpayers as opposed to generating revenue for products and services. I think the way that it's been set up with this accountability, particularly for ESSER, works pretty well. So it seems to me that things are well in hand and simple is best, and not try and complicate things other than people understanding what the process is.
To the chair. Yes, sir.
My comments.
Dr. Moore, I have two other questions if I can. Okay. Debt service fund. So we brought up in our conversation about big payments that are happening this year, and that you've got us in a good position to be able to not only handle those payments, but at what point are we going to be out of debt? I know, but would you tell us all?
Through the chair, majority of your debt will be paid off in the next 5 years. You have one that's a qualified school construction bond, which goes out, I believe, to 2031 or 32. That's $1.5 million, I think, a year going into a seeking fund.
And so we're all good with having money set aside to pay off all our debt.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
I love hearing that, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to your team. That my other comment is thank you to your team for putting all this together. And I know it's not just you, the two of you that are sitting here, but it's your entire team. Kim, thank you for all you do and for your entire team, because I know that hasn't been a happy place in the past, and it seems like every time I walk through there, everybody's really happy. So I appreciate whatever you're doing, that the people that are helping write our paychecks are in a happy place. So we appreciate that. And also, we're in a good situation. You know, we're stable, and we're moving in a really positive direction. We're going to be able to pay off our debt. So things are looking pretty good. We appreciate that work.
I want to thank Mr. Fagan and team as well. I came here early Saturday morning, and there was Mr. Fagan's truck, and Kim's car came Sunday evening, and there was Mr. Fagan's truck once again. So this is not a 9-to-5 job. These are individuals who are committed to providing the resources that we all need to be in service of our children. And to be very, very honest, walking in as superintendent, this was one of the biggest concerns or issues that I had, the lack of stability regarding funding and how things were being managed and resourced to where it is today. It's not me, it's Mr. Fagan and team, so we all should be proud and have a level of comfort with the leadership that we have around the dollars and our ability to maximize those dollars for kids. And on that note, we will move to the second item, which is still Mr. Fagan. He'll review items that's going for the board for approval this evening.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Through the chair. I have 4 items. Review Chromebooks. Going to purchase approximately 33 additional Chromebooks for grades 2 through 4, and also about 6,700 cases. Have an item we mentioned before about a construction manager at risk. This is for any facilities project as we need them. They'll already be in contract. We hire them and engage them as needed. We have the purchase of student identification cards, which includes the pictures, the student's ID, and et cetera, scan, et cetera, for next year. And of course, increase for healthcare benefits and the stop-loss premium policy. Any questions?
Board members, any questions on any of those?
No, but just to clarify, so anybody viewing knows this, we've gone over all of these in some detail in our weekly board meetings with both of you. So the lack of questions simply reflects that we are aware of what's going through, not that that we didn't necessarily have questions in the past.
Chair, yes, ma'am.
So the only clarification I'd like is where are the Chromebook laptops coming out of what budget line?
Chair, capital.
Capital budget, okay.
Next item, for the very first time, our new Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction. Clap it up and give her some encouragement
Miss Basura.
as she will present the items in contract for Curriculum Instruction. Ms. Basura.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Through the chair, good afternoon, board members. We, as reviewed in individual board meetings, briefings this past week, we have several annual renewals and existing agreements that I'd just like to go over with you. We have out of Treasure Coast Technical College a review of the homeschool dual enrollment articulation agreement, the high school dual enrollment articulation agreement. We have the Treasure Coast Technical College school calendar, their tuition fees, and 2 other parts for Treasure Coast Technical College. We have the affiliation agreement with Stewart Health Group, and also the review of the ACTS retirement nursing agreement. And those last 2 are for our students to get clinical experience. We also have up with CTE the review of the Palm Gardens agreement. That is also so our students can get 40 hours of clinical education experience. Our early learning department with Principal Brooke Flood has 3 agreements for review. The RCMA, that's the Redlands Christian Migrant Association agreement, the collaborative agreement with the Economic Opportunity Council, and that's in collaboration with Indian River and Okeechobee counties. And lastly, out of the early learning program, we have the voluntary pre-K provider contract, and that's with the Early Learning Coalition for the 2022-2023 school year. Last up, out of the academic success department, we have an amendment to the dual enrollment collegiate agreement with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical. We went from 7 sections to 11 sections, so we'll be amending the 2021-2022 agreement with them. And last but certainly not least is the contract with Edgenuity for credit recovery. Any questions?
Board members, questions? Doc?
Just one, Ms. Baser. So when we get into the Palm Gardens and for our students on their clinicals, do we have enough contracts for those students? I know we kind of dropped that with COVID and so forth, so are we going to be okay there with our CNA and our clinicals?
Yes.
Okay, that's the one thing I had, because I know we dropped, well, because of COVID, and we couldn't be in there, so that was my main question. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or comment? Wow, you got off easy.
Thank you very much.
That's your first time only.
I know.
It was
Except
your
to say-
it was your one pass with this motley crew right here.
Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
And then our next will be by Ms. Dampier, the entitlement grants.
Good afternoon. Through the chair, I have one item that's on the board meeting agenda this afternoon. It's the entitlement grants. We have 17 grants that I've reviewed with each board member for a total of approximately $14,528,836. These funds, the majority of them are used for salaries, purchase, also for resources and services to improve student achievement. Do you have any questions?
Board members? No? Okay. I'd just like to say, first of all, to both of you, and I know you're not done, but, you know, we thank everybody in finance for doing everything they do, but I don't think people realize how much writing there is to do agreements and to do grant writing. And so we appreciate your team for doing that. I know how hard that is for, I see somebody going, yes, back there. I know how hard that is to keep up with all that paperwork and make sure we are putting it all in on time and getting what we can get for our district, so we appreciate that.
Ms. Van Borg, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Dr. Boer or Ms. Dampier, our new grant writers, have they started and have gotten us any money yet?
Through the chair, we have submitted grants after just 1 week on the job with one of them. So we're looking forward to really maximizing the use of those individuals really to offset the continuous impact on and shrinking funds to our general budget. But we're looking forward to a high yield on that investment.
Thank you.
So our hearing none, our next item is also Ms. Dampier. She will review a policy that is going for the bill in response to House Bill 1557. Ms. Dampier.
Good afternoon again. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my team who's worked tirelessly throughout the last couple of months to make sure all the different changes that have come through. I have Dr. Lewis, I have Ms. Bass, I have Tracy Magoo and team, and the whole entire Student Services Department and Mental Health Department. They worked above and beyond to make sure that we're in compliance with when we open school. So without further ado, today I will provide you an overview of House Bill 1557, Parental Rights and Education, which also requires the development of procedures for student and parent complaints, which we are going to, you'll see on the board agenda tonight, Policy 5710. This is an overview of House Bill 1557, which points out the Parents' Bill of Rights, which sets forth parental rights in their minor child's education as well as health. It also prohibits us as an organization from infringing on fundamental rights of a parent to direct the upbringing,
Nancy.
education, health care, and mental health of their minor child. It's important to note that important information relating to a minor child should not be withheld from the parent relating to the minor child's health, well-being, and education. And that's all part of that parental rights bill. The requirements of House Bill 1557 outlines that school districts must notify parents at the beginning of the school year each healthcare services offered at their student's school and the option to withhold any consent or decline any specific services. And that's important. My team has really worked hard, and they we really thank IT to come up with a process. And so the IT department has really been working with my team to make this come to fruition, which is parents will have the option to opt in or opt out of mental wellness or health services. That option will be through the parental acknowledgement form and focus. So when parents log on the first time, they'll have a series of questions that they'll be able to opt in and opt out. We'll have paper copies for those parents who do not have technology. We've already spoken to the principals on Friday about making sure that they have access space on their campuses for orientation for parents to log on to focus. We also will have a pop-up screen. So on the website, we know a lot of traffic is going to be coming with parents actually looking at the buses, cafeteria, all of those things. If they have not signed up for parent access through Focus, that will pop up when they log on, when all of us log on. So that's encouraging all of our parents to get access for that. Requirements of House Bill 1557 also that we must adopt procedures for notifying parents, student's parent, if there is a change in the student's services in relation to mental wellness and physical health. As you can see, the procedures that we've created as far as noticing the parents is that first, contact would be by telephone for the parent to come in for a in-person meeting. We also will require email or written letter to inform the parent of the change circumstances and to request an in-person meeting. All of this is making sure that we have the parents come in for an in-person meeting. At the meeting with the parent, we're going to explain and talk about the change circumstances and receive information offered by the parent, so it's a collaborative conversation and explore options for the student. Then we're going to, after the meeting, send the parent a follow-up email or a letter via U.S. mail to document what was discussed in the meeting and the planned outcome. And then we're going to schedule a meeting if we're not successful of getting the parent to come in, because we really want the parent to be there. We'll have our student services team go out to the home to try to have the parents schedule like we would normally do if we were trying to get in contact with the parent. Procedures for responding to parent concerns. There is a requirement that if a parent contacts the principal in writing with concerns, the principal would need to respond to the concern for resolving the concern within the 7-day timeline of written receipt of the complaint. The principal, if the concern is not resolved within the 30 days, the principal must provide the parent with a statement of the reason for not resolving the concern. And along the way, student services will be working with the principal to make sure that, we're in compliance, because this is important that we follow protocol with making sure that we meet the needs of the parent within that 7 and 30-day window timeline. Next steps, August 2nd, we're going to be training all of our school counselors, mental health specialists, and school psychologists on these procedures. It will be outlined to make sure that they know where all the forms are located. They will look at the opt-in and opt-out procedures, so they'll have an idea of what that looks like. And we just want to make sure we review the requirements of House Bill 1557 and procedures to ensure compliance, because it's our diligence to make sure that we follow our policy, which will be 5710. Are there any questions?
Board members, questions? Ms. Rosario?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you for listening to community members and capturing what is required of us to do now in this. I had a follow-up question with a conversation that we had last week, side by side with the current policy that we have that is student and parents' rights.
Complaints.
That is policy 5780. What I did not see, and I may have missed it, was a note, I think we agreed that there would be a note here that said, for parent and student rights, see policy, blah, blah, blah. Did we put it in there?
Yes. it
Oh,
is
I
in the
don't
new-
have that one. I
Yes.
have my old one.
Yes,
Okay.
it's at the bottom of page 1.
Okay.
It's in pink, but I sent
Okay.
on Friday.
And we're going to do that on on the policy, right? Say, for complaints, see policy 5710
5710, yes.
on
when we
here.
get to that.
We
Yes.
haven't done that yet?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And I guess for board members and for the community, what we were talking about is that we already have a policy 5780, which is the student and parent rights. And so they go hand in hand. And what I was requesting, which was already done on this new policy, was just a note that said, for, to see your rights, student and parent rights, see policy, blah, 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 and then vice versa with the other one. So that's upcoming, thank you. The concern that I had was with the exception and what I've been hearing, the exception from withholding information. I just want to be careful that we are not misinterpreting that statement, that statement through the true eyes of what is considered abuse, not what is interpreted to possibly be abuse, that understanding will be provided in the training, that there would be a clear distinction, because obviously we are trained, we are mandated reporters. And if there is abuse, we report, and it is anonymous. What I don't want is for the misunderstanding that you are perceiving an abuse to occur, and so therefore you are going to withhold information from the parent. And that's what that would be a gross misrepresentation with the law, with the statute, and what is written. Now, I know what we wrote here is exactly what is in statute, but I just want, if you look at the history, if you go back and you pull up the summary analysis of the bill, you'll be able to see that what I'm expressing here is captured in the summary. So how are we going to ensure that that won't be an issue? Obviously, it would be very important for us to make sure that our training provides that and ensures that there is a distinction between those two to protect our employees, obviously, and to protect the students and the parents. But what are we going to do for that?
Dr. Lewis.
There's always a training that the Department of Children and Families puts out to all staff, has to have that. They have to have that training.
Sorry, I think
in
your
terms of
mic's
the
not on.
mandatory reporting. Excuse me.
No, your mic is on,
Yeah.
it wasn't on.
There is a training that's required that our staff has to have that will review all of those procedures and requirements in terms of when we have a situation that arises as a mandatory reporter, what you have to do. So that is something that is done every year, every school year.
But it will be, we will make sure there's a distinction, and we're mandatory reporter and what the statute says.
Okay.
That will be part of the training.
All right, and where does it say anywhere, and I don't know if I've seen it, so I'm just asking, where does it say anywhere that we are not writing down when there is an abuse, or not when there isn't, when an abuse has occurred, where does it say that we don't capture that in writing? I know that it's been practiced, but I don't know if I've ever seen it in writing.
I just know when you call 1-800-96-ABUSE, they usually give you a number, and you usually write that number down and who the person, they ask you your name and that kind of thing. But they capture usually what you say, and then they determine whether or not they are going to do,
Yeah.
proceed any further. At that point in time, Of course, I would always just make sure they decided that they were not going to perceive any, but I don't know of anything that's written that says but as far as to your question was putting it in a file,
Yeah, do we capture that in a student's file?
when DCF gets involved and they tell us, this child, they'll come in and they'll say, hey, this child cannot be with the parent. And then at that point in time, we do usually put something in the system saying that at this point that they cannot have that contact. But that's usually when we have documentation from DCF or the police, et cetera, that tells us that, or some type of a document.
There has to be a legal,
Yeah.
something legal.
Yes, not
That
just.
determines that.
Yes.
But otherwise, do we capture, maybe Ms. Shattuck can answer that question. Are we obligated to write down in a student's file folder any concerns or potential concerns for abuse? I don't recall ever doing that as an administrator, but I'm just wondering if something has changed along the way.
Were you still talking?
Yes, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Through the chair. Can you hear me? Okay. So as Dr. Lewis and Ms. Dampier were saying, with regard to DCF reporting, that's something that's under Chapter 39. It's something staff are trained on, being mandatory reporters. DCF being a separate agency than us, once we do the mandatory reporting, they take it from there, and their files would not typically be enmeshed in our files. So whatever kind of DCF, whatever they're doing in their investigation isn't necessarily going to be reflected at all in our files. It would only be reflected if we did get something from them that was directing our behavior, like, for example, if a parent had lost parental rights. So no, it would not typically be something that would be in a student's education file, things related to child abuse, abandonment, or neglect. It would be something that would be in a DCF file, which would be kept by them as a separate agency.
But everything else would be captured in a student file. Everything that would not be considered a DCF report, correct? So what if there is an intention, what if there is, I don't know, let me think of an example. What if there is concern or a counseling session where a counselor says, or a counselor may assume that there might be abuse, but there isn't, it isn't reported, does that get captured in a student's file folder?
Again, they would have to follow procedure and contact the DCF and indicate what was discussed in that situation, and then DCF has to take it upon themselves to, pursue it and
So at what
investigate
point,
it.
with this new law, where do the parents fall in this? In the not withholding, there has been no abuse, and there has been counseling provided, where does the parent fall in this line of communication to ensure that we're not withholding from them?
Okay, so typically DCF would, investigate from situations, example, the parent may be, again, they're contacted by DCF. They would, from my knowledge, go to the house, for example, and investigate the situation. So in that moment, they would be informed of, that's why they're there, to, identify what has taken place so they can do their due diligence in determining is what was stated from the school standpoint, if there's a concern. So that's how that works. So they are notified if, in that situation, when, in terms of their investigation process, but again, it's a case by case, there's different situations that, may warrant even the police to come be a part of that.
Yeah, but that's when it's already reported. I'm talking about when there isn't a need for a report. There is a counseling session going on, and it's not, whatever it is that's in the counseling session is not shared with the parent. I guess my point is we need to make sure that we're sharing everything with parents. We need to make sure that we are not withholding information from parents.
Okay,
That's
so
the
there is an
biggest-
exception. There is an exception.
There is an
when
exception
a
if there is
student-
abuse, if there is assumed to be, if there is, and it says it here, the exception is only if a prudent person would believe that the disclosure would result in abuse. I get that. But everything else has to be shared with parents. And even then, we still have to make sure that we're looking at things through the eyes of transparency, not through disclosure, not through non-disclosure.
And that is correct. That's why the parent is going to give consent. If they say no, they do not want their child.
The individual.
Yes.
So
yes.
that checklist that,
Yes.
that parents will be able to opt in or out at the beginning of the year
Yes.
is going to be on Focus.
Yes.
And it's going to have everything like à la carte,
Yes.
menu item.
Yes.
Group counseling,
Mhm.
I
I have that.
agree. Individual counseling, I agree. I don't
Same
even-
thing that we have, I can give you a few examples. Like for health services, care treatment for illness or injury, vision screening, hearing screening, scoliosis, growth, they get to pick and choose. For school counseling, that area is peer mediation, conflict resolution, short-term individual counseling, group counseling, bereavement counseling. Those are the normal, counseling. This does not denote academic counseling, of course,
Right.
we're going to continue with academic. But this would be the menu, and the parents would select yes, no,
And we're
for each
doing
item.
library books on there as well.
Library books, there is a section, and on this parent acknowledgement form, there's tons. It's all offices combined.
Everything.
Federal programs, everyone is for our homeless students and things that we have to do.
That's the lunch forms? Are the lunch forms on there? Because you said federal programs.
No, but that's pertaining to like the homeless, some requirements that we
Gotcha.
have to fill out for that. It's a whole menu of when the parent logs on for the first time. So,
Okay. I think that's a great thing.
And then
I
we'll-
think to be able to capture it all in one place is important. I just don't want us to share the message of any misinterpretation of the statute, so I want to make sure that we are clear about that.
and that's the guidance that we're going to be making sure that our counselors and all of our staff have that clear understanding. We'll also have an icon for those who decline parent consent that says they do not want. We'll be able to see that when you log on. So that will be noticed as well. If a parent, that's why we want to make sure that parents sign up for Focus so they can answer these questions, so we have that information ahead of time and running those reports.
So where are the permission to take pictures at the beginning of the year?
That's
You know,
part
you
of
can-
that.
That's part of that
Yeah,
as well?
the parent acknowledgement, all of that. IT for technology, that's a part of it.
Okay.
Library books, I mean,
Perfect.
all of, so.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Jones.
The first part about responding to parent concerns, I think, well, I did that before there was a state statute, and you didn't get back to them in 7 days, you got back to them in 1 day. That's number one. But on looking at House Bill 1557, starting with line 82, a school district may not adopt procedures or student support forms that prohibit school district personnel from notifying a parent about his or her student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being or change-related services or monitoring. 100%, understand that. Parent needs to be notified. Now, we may not discourage or prohibit parental notification of an involvement in critical decision affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. This subparagraph does not prohibit a school district from adopting procedures that permit school personnel to withhold such information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Okay, number one, whether, and I reported situations to DCF many times in my 17 years as a principal. What are we doing? What are we doing to make sure that this doesn't happen? I mean, sometimes, and I'm speaking as a parent, grandparent, everything, sometimes the issue is the home. So what are we doing to make sure that we are protecting these students and making sure that they're getting the best help possible? It says, it does not prohibit a school district from adopting procedures that permit school personnel to withhold such information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect. And I don't know about you, but if you've been a principal and you report to DCF, I'm checking on that kid every day. You want to make sure they are okay, because I knew sometimes I could make it worse. But it was my job to do so. What are we doing in this case? Dr. Moore, Ms. Dampier, I don't care who answers. Dr. Lewis?
Again, there's a protection. The school administrator has 24 hours.
Right.
During that time period, while DCF or whoever is investigating the situation to protect the student. So that's something that is in place. And that's part of the statute. So that's something that we have to follow. That's our obligation.
And after that investigation, then what?
Well, again,
It's up to them to-
those, whatever is founded, and if there's reason to believe that what was stated by, whoever, immediately that student would be in the protection and the care, I'm assuming of, for example, of DCF or
So
even
if
police
there's no
care.
issue, they notify the school district so we know the student is okay?
Yes.
I mean, I haven't been there for a few years.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
And then what do we do from there?
If we know that the kid is okay, of course, and I would make sure that the kid feels supported at the school as the principal, as well as if the counselor, you look to make sure that you have permission to, speak with that student, based on now that we have these procedures, to make sure that that student is safe and feels safe and secure.
And as a parent, and I know that you want all children to be safe, and sometimes the circumstances are hard to, even discuss, but I just don't want any child caught up in this. And, going back to budget, it does relate. Dr. Moore, when you hired elementary counselors for our elementary schools,
It's huge.
you have no idea, and I've talked to many of them, what they are doing for our kids and our teachers and our parents coming and talking with them. I never want to have that where, okay, I better not be able to do this or I can't do that. I don't want people thinking just because it's a new state statute, that one, we've been doing for years. It's a state law now notifying, who wouldn't notify a parent? That is what we are supposed to do. As a parent, I want to be notified. As a grandparent, that parent, my kids want to be notified, but I just want to make sure no student gets caught up in this and there's an issue. We've all talked about this at last board meetings with the mental issues and what Mr. Fagan sent out earlier for the nation on mental health issues. There's an issue here, folks. It's said all the time. Our kids, our parents, our teachers, there's an issue. So I want to make sure that this doesn't hurt any child.
Through the chair, just a level of reassurance, we are like-minded. We can implement this policy ensuring that parents are properly notified, communicated with, and partner with in terms of supporting them with any services or support that they would like for them to have. While at the same time, in the most egregious and unfortunate cases, as you referenced, this is not new. This part that you're referencing here is something that's been in practice for a very, very, very long time. And unfortunately, I have had the opportunity to call DCF as a counselor, as an assistant principal, as a principal, even as a director walking schools and observing things, in which that notification was taking place. And there's a very systematic procedure that's in place. It is a dance between the Division of Children and Families, the school system, unfortunately, in some cases, law enforcement, in which we have great partnerships to work the protocol to ensure, is it an immediate threat in which we need to intercede prior to the dismissal? Is it something in which DCF will follow their passive approach in which they call and do the investigation? At the end of the day, we're advocating for children while at the same time honoring parental rights. So I'm very comfortable in the process that this system has followed and will continue to follow. Our educators, our administrators, they are champions for our children. While at the same time, I think the way Ms. Dampier and team have crafted this policy maximizes the ability to get that access and that communication to parents on the very, very, very first day of school, and if anything, highlight the opportunity to keep parents informed as they should rightfully be informed moving forward. So I think what we have done here really is a nice balance to meet the intent of the state statute while at the same time ensuring that we can move swift enough through a legal process in partnering with other entities in order to be best by kids.
Okay, any other board members? Dr. Schiff.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jones, for reiterating that our first and foremost obligation is to the children who are in our schools for 6 to 8 hours a day. There is this notion out there that schools and districts and teachers are somehow intentionally harming kids or keeping information away from parents, and I want to make it 100% clear that is not what we ever do intentionally, and to disabuse people of the notion that that's what's happening in our schools. To that end, a couple of questions. Ms. Dampier, I know that the state is putting out or has put out guidelines on this. Have those come down? Are they sufficient? And I assume that's the basis on which all our policies are crafted alongside legal obligation.
Yes, we did get procedures, and we vetted those procedures, and we made some changes, and they're embedded into our policy to make sure that everyone knows when they pull this policy for parent complaints, this is the procedure that must be followed. And like Ms. Rosario said, we're going to make sure that in that policy 5780, we put that parent complaints, this policy number to reference that as well, because this is a new policy for us.
Yeah, it's a new policy consistent with state guidelines,
Yes.
legal obligations, all of the above, consistent with best practices in Indian River County.
Yes.
The, as I read this, and we had this conversation, the obligation here specifically, and it was in your PowerPoint, and it's in, is when there is a change in services related to mental wellness or physical health. So that's not simply an observation about a child. That's when the school district determines that that they have observed that there is something that would require a change in services to the children, to a child, but not simply an observation randomly about a child. It's only when services happen that it invokes these procedures, correct?
That is correct, and you will see that first we want to make a phone call, but then we also want the parent to come in all of those cases. We're going to send a social worker out there. We want to collaborate and make sure that we're meeting the needs of the students with the parent.
So what happens, and you who are closer to schools than I am and have spent more time in schools, I'm relying on your expertise here. What happens, or is it common, does it happen, or to what degree, when there might be a concern of a school administrator, teacher, some school personnel? DCF may have been called, but it does not rise to the level of a formal DCF complaint or removal from the home or DCF intervention, but yet there's still a concern that that child could be, if not in direct path of harm or in jeopardy, but that something's not right. What do we do? And how often, if at all, does that happen? And if so, how do we best protect the child under those circumstances?
So what we would do is ensure that a meeting is called, which is still part of the procedure. Something we've always done anyway is ensure that we have this meeting, invite the individuals who could be a teacher, could be student services, staff, that have information that, there's some needs for the student that they would want to organize. And so again, it's that collaboration. So the parent will be invited, and we will come together in a meeting and, again, problem solve around the student and to identify, what are the next steps for this student? How can we best support this student's academics and their well-being, their success?
Does it ever occur, and I don't mean to be sounding like a lawyer here and putting you on the stand, but I'm curious because I really don't, I want to clarify the answers to these. Let's say there was a concern about some form of abuse or neglect. It does not rise to the level of DCF, but let's say there's bullying in the home by a parent. Let's say that there's another adult in the home, not a parent, who the child is uncomfortable with. Any number of scenarios where a conversation with the parent would have to be managed very carefully. I assume we have policies and procedures in place, but can you talk a little bit about that?
So again, once we have that information from the teacher, for example, I'm just doing like a scenario, and it was investigated, but it did not rise to occasion where the student was removed from the home, for example. We will continue to, again, observe the student and monitor, just ensuring that the student is safe, supported. We would, again, student comes up, monitor the situation. If the student has concerns, and, again, we will make sure that we are just being observant. And if, again, we are mandatory reporters. So if the student does make, again, some sort of, account of there's something that's taken place, we will have to continue to do our due diligence to protect that student and pick up the phone and contact DCF. We just have to continue to do the best that we can. I've seen it where sometimes we maybe have a social worker, sometimes has to go out to the home as well, just to check in. Sometimes if we are really feeling the student is in danger, for example, we like to ensure that we talk to our law enforcement to do a wellness check on the student. So that's another layer of protection. So we have a continued concern.
Yeah, I understand all of this. I appreciate your hard work on this policy. I know you've worked with all of us individually on this. And there are so many gray areas that we have not yet confronted that I think we're hearing the concern expressed here. So, but we can't address those, unfortunately, until they happen. So,
But rest assured, we do have a process in place. We have our school psychologists. We have a team at the school that's there to make sure that the student is safe. But of course, if it's not the parent or the guardian, we're going to always make sure that the parent is contacted, and we collaborate together to make sure that our children are safe. That's our number 1 priority.
thank you. That's it for now.
Mr. Barefoot? You good? Okay. I have a couple questions. So was this created with the Neola?
We have services through Neola. However, we went through, they gave us a little guidance because we do pay them for that. However, my team went through and we looked at it, and step by step, we eliminated some things. We added some things that we felt like needed to be in there for procedures. So it is a combination.
The reason why I asked that is because in the past, we have approved new policy as a board, and then we wound up having to change it because Neola's policy came out and it was quite different. How are we going to make sure that that's not the case here?
Well, with this, I've already had a conversation. I did strike through some things based on conversations with Neola last week and our attorney as well. And some parts of the Neola policy was a stretch that their interpretation, but it wasn't in statute. So if it wasn't in statute and we had questions about it and we felt like it just didn't fit, we took that out.
Okay.
But
I'd rather we follow statute.
Yes.
Okay.
We want to make sure we follow statute, and there were some things, some items in there that did not, I questioned because it was not in statute. So if it's not in statute, why was it there? And so I even reached out to our attorney and we had conversations about it. And so, but this policy and procedure was vetted, and it makes sure that we're following state statute, and those procedures are embedded in there to make sure that we follow that.
Okay. Next question. So I see where it says any parent or legal guardian with concern regarding the implementation of the provisions may file a written complaint, and it says A, B, C, D, okay? So there is no such mention of a form. It's just a written complaint. So we have trained our principals, and we will be training our teachers and our counselors on the fact that if they get a note from a parent, might be scribbled on a piece of paper, little scrap of piece of paper, that's a written complaint.
Yes.
So what is it that they have to have on there so that we have verification that that's a written complaint? Their name, the date, or whatever? Is there some sort of thing that they absolutely have to have, or just their name and what the complaint is?
The name and what the complaint. We want to make sure that it was vague enough where the parent, a lot of times if we have so many barriers to making sure that those complaints are answered, but it's a written form. There's not a form that they have to, if the parent notebook
Hands you a paper as they're
Yes.
going through the drive-through.
Yes, and they're
Okay.
going to scan that and make sure that that paper is uploaded into our focus system for documentation.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
There's documentation then
Yes.
that it was received
Yes.
and the date and the time and okay.
Absolutely.
That's great. At the bottom where it says the Parents' Bill of Rights, and it has strike out through criminal justice procedures, could you explain why that's stricken out?
That was one of those items that I had a conversation with Neola with, and based on Neola, there wasn't in statute that. It was how did she put it? An overstretch of just making sure that, say for instance, if law enforcement, if a kid, they gave the example, if like they suspected that there were drugs and they had the dog go in and all of that, that would cover us in that case. But we're already covered in other policies with that. I just didn't understand why that was placed in this policy.
Okay.
And
'cause-
so I had conversation with even our attorney. Do you want to talk about your interpretation of it as well?
Well, let me give you an example, a real example I had, and this is why I question this, because my very first week as a principal, I had a fifth grader arrested and put in the back of a car. It was something that happened the year prior in school, and so they decided to arrest him in school, fifth grader. So I was very concerned. The parent wasn't there. They didn't talk to the parent. They just grabbed the kid and put him in the back of a car and took him off. At that point, it was, okay, who calls the parent? Why isn't the parent part of the investigation of why they're doing that? Where are we in the fact of defending children when things like that happen? And how can we get the parent involved from the very beginning so the parent doesn't find out hours later where their child is?
Thank you, Chairwoman. So with regard to how it's worded in here, it says the Parents' Bill of Rights in Florida Statute Chapter 1014 sets forth parental rights in their minor's child's education and health care and criminal justice procedures. And we crossed out the criminal justice procedures as it reads in that sentence. It doesn't make sense because if you look at the Parent Bill of Rights in 1014, it actually only speaks to things such as the rights of the parents to direct the child's upbringing, education, healthcare, and mental health, and it never discusses criminal justice procedures.
So what do we do?
So, but in the instance that you are referring to, I completely agree with you that if there's a law enforcement action taken with a child, a minor child in an elementary school, that parents should be notified. And I would assume, not being at school
Any
myself,
child under
but
the
that's
age
what's
of
happening.
18, any child under the age of 18, what is it that we are doing if a child is taken in the back of a car? Because it's not written here. What's the procedure that we're telling people to do? In other words, who contacts a parent and when is the parent contacted, I guess?
Through the chair, that policy is not addressing that. If you are involved in a criminal act, it moves from whether it is on school campus or not. Once you conduct a criminal act, it becomes a criminal investigation, and law enforcement takes the lead in that specific scenario. So once they have the lead, they have the obligation to report as if it was a minor in a 7-Eleven or if it was someone in the particular school. The practice is once that investigation is conducted and the student is turned back over, that legal criminal investigation has concluded, then it's turned back over to staff, and then we notify the parents, this is what happened. Typically, the relationship we have with our law enforcement, they're making that conduct and having those conversations. But once it becomes a violation of a law and they conducted a criminal act, it is the lead in that investigation is in fact the police or sheriffs.
So a child is removed from the campus. A parent comes to pick them up after school, and I haven't notified them to tell them that their child is not on the campus if I'm the principal or the teacher or whatever. So I can see there's going to be a problem with that.
That's not this policy, that's
I know,
before the
I
board.
understand that. That's why it said it was crossed out. So that's why I'm asking, do we have it somewhere in policy that we are notifying a parent when their child is removed from the campus?
When they're removed from the campus, let me find the policy in which it's referenced. But the
please? Okay.
procedure is, just so you know, this is what happened, there was a criminal investigation, the officers have arrested your son or daughter, and this is where they were going. I can't think in the 3 years that I've been here where that's actually been the case, where they have not been notified, the parents, whether it be in partnership with the sheriff's office, in partnership with the assistant principal who's handling the case. That's never been an issue. I don't think we've had a situation where,
I
lo and
understand
behold-
that. It's a oral agreement, but I think it should be in statute or in policy or written somewhere who calls and that the call is made. If we're going to protect parents' rights and tell a parent, hey, your child's been removed from the campus, the question is it the SRO's job? Is it the arresting officer's job? Is it the assistant principal's job? Whose job is it? But somebody needs to contact that parent.
We can provide the procedure, because it's depending on where you are in the investigation, it's a different person's responsibility.
Right, I understand that, but
So
a child's removed from a campus.
We have it and can provide.
If you could provide the board with the policy and direct us to where it is. Thank you. Thank you for procedure for giving notice, B. I know you and I had a long conversation about that. I appreciate you striking out the telephone contact is not successful because, again, paper trail. Parents need to have documentation. The school district needs documentation for a defense. So I appreciate the fact that we're putting everything in writing. So I thank you for that. The last thing I have is when a parent, two things. When a parent fills out the form at the beginning of the year, and maybe they select group counseling or something, are they notified there who's doing the counseling, which agency or which person's doing the counseling? And if that changes, are they notified then?
The counseling that we're talking about is the group counseling is at the school, our staff doing that. If they do any type of other counseling, that is another form where parents have to agree to that.
So they're not agreeing to that at the beginning of the year with,
No,
I
that's-
need
that's
substance
in
abuse
addition
counseling or
yeah,
something?
yeah.
Okay.
This is when our school counselors are doing this.
Great. And then at the beginning of the year, they're clicking all this, but then let's say mid-year, teacher feels like they need group counselor or whoever. So that change then, how does that change then? We put it in writing to the parent, and then the parent goes in and clicks on that and agrees, or how is that done?
We're still working on that with IT. I don't want to say that, but the goal is that they can go in and make changes, and it will show that when they made the change, who made the change via.
So it'll be a paper trail as to
Yes.
the date and the
Yes.
change time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I want to make sure. That's all I have. Anyone else?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
For the parent acknowledgement forms and the parents opt in or opt out, online or paper copy, who collects all that and gives the information to everyone at a high school with 3,000 students?
Well, the goal
I
is,
know
that's
it's
why we're trying to
focused.
do everything via Focus.
But
So-
who's looking and getting all of those?
So it's going to be uploaded in the child's information. So when you log on as a parent, you go in and select, and then it's inputted into that child's
Okay.
folder that says whether or not he or she, that you've updated the parent contact. So it's not just our items, it's parent contact information is going to be. There's going to be IT, whether or not the code of conduct, they received a copy of the code, things that we've normally been doing along the way. We just added this layer. So when you go in and look at the student, you'll be able to see whether or not you have permission for example, for the library books, that you selected yay or nay for that. For us, it will be the mental wellness, whether or not you've selected to opt in or opt out.
So will
of
every
that.
teacher get a copy of their students and all of the opt-in?
It will be on the computer where they can see it, so if they pull up the student.
So they'll have all the students?
Yes.
Like from Vero Beach High School, and you go in and click yours?
Yes.
Students?
So if it's John Doe, you would pick John Doe, and you'll be able to see what choices were selected for John Doe. We're trying to make it easier for the mental health and health services to where an icon comes up for the services that if the parent says no, they're opting out. That would be the easiest than us going in. We have to go in if they didn't opt out and look at what services they selected.
What if they didn't answer paper or focus?
That's when our social workers are
They'll
going to
go
go
out?
out to the home. Our goal is to make sure that everyone has completed that in focus. If we do it if they do it paper and pencil, we'll have to scan that form in, and then it will be up under mental health folder. So we're really trying to get parents to do it electronically because it's easier to read it.
So if they didn't hear anything, they cannot assume there's going to be an opt-in, so they really can't offer any services.
That is correct. And then we'll be checking as well, Mrs. Bass's team will be checking to make sure that we're looking to go out to homes to make those home visits if we have not heard back in the schools. Same thing we do for if there's an attendance issue.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Rosario?
I have some questions that might be a legal question, I'm not sure. So, based on the information that is provided in statute on required reporting of child abuse, abandonment, and neglect, the signs for physical abuse, the signs for sexual abuse, and the signs for neglect are all described, even on the DOE's website, as those observations that have been observed or received. Observed, I see physical bruises, and there has to be there should as well, because it says on there, if there is a pattern of these observations, then you're mandated to report it. If there is, regular or not torn, stained clothing, whatever, itching in certain areas, neglect of so many other different reasons that are here. So those are observed or heard. I come to a teacher or a guidance counselor, I say, I have been abused, or I have been, this is what happened to me, a student says. So we report that abuse. That's clear in the statute, right? It's very, very clear. What I have not seen in the current statute, and this is where I think there is a conflict, is that the current statute is clear on what is observed or what has happened that you have been told, then you report it. There doesn't seem to be the same language that's in this new statute. So the language in this new statute says, information from a parent if a prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect. That language is not the same language that's in current statute. So I think there's a conflict there. So far in current statute, it just says if you've observed it, if there's a pattern, or if you've been told, then you report. Here it's saying if you believe whatever is happening will result. So you're assuming that there might be abuse, and that's dangerous. There are children who come home every day, kids. My parent's going to kill me because I didn't get an A. My parent's going to kill me because I didn't, submit my homework. Could that be a presumption for abuse or neglect? And I think that it's not anyone's fault here. I just think that there is a misinterpretation of what's currently in statute, and then this new statute language seems to me to be a little conflicting with current statute. That's where I think there is a concern.
Yes, through the chair. So I agree with everything that you're saying, that with DCF reporting, you report when there is known or suspected abuse, abandonment, or neglect. That's something that maybe you see, like you repeatedly are seeing bruises. It could be something that the student is saying. But what this new statute is saying is the whole focus is if we are making any changes to a student's education or health or, well-being in our schools, that we are involving the parent in that we're notifying them of what we're doing. Here, they are carving out an exception that we could withhold information that a student tells us if they are basically telling us, oh, my parent may kick me out of the house, or my parent may hurt me if you notify them. So this would be something where students basically maybe telling a counselor something, but asking that their parent not be informed because they're afraid that if their parent knows, that it could result in them doing something like kicking them out of the house or something else that would fall under abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Does that make sense?
No, I hear what you're saying, but it's still conflicting because we have, Chapter 39 is in this statute as defined in 39.01, but then when you go there, it's not, it just seems very, again, it just seems very conflicting. In our policy, we are adding, after that statement, we have added a line that says, or a paragraph that says, please note, as a reminder, under state law and policy 8462, student abuse, abandonment, neglect, school personnel who know or have reasonable cause to suspect that a child or a student has been abused. But there's still, I think what the fine line here is the assumption that something may occur that hasn't, or that a student might exaggerate a situation and then it winds up being it happens all the time, right? Students, please don't tell my parent, but really nothing's gonna, and the parent's like, what, that's just silly. Parents I've witnessed where parents are completely supportive and the kid is just a teenager, Not to say that that doesn't happen when there's real abuse. I'm just saying sometimes it happens the opposite way. I'm just wondering what would happen. I guess my next question to you is, what happens if current statute or current law has just recently been passed, but it conflicts with another law? Which I'm sure has happened at some point, right? So then which one do you follow?
Yes, thank you for that question. So it would depend. There is precedence, or rather a hierarchical order to law. So something like a federal law takes precedence over something like a state law. Something like the Florida Constitution takes precedence over something like a Florida statute. Something like a Florida statute takes precedence over something like a State Board of Education rule. So sometimes you can make those determinations just based on that hierarchy. Otherwise, you have to look at other factors. A lot of things in law can be dependent on facts of the situation, so it can be kind of hard to deal with hypotheticals. I think here, in the types of things that we're looking at here, you always kind of want to take into consideration what was the purpose of this law. So here the purpose is openness, right? Communication between the families and the educators. So to uphold that purpose, you want to err on that side. Mm-hmm. But also here we are talking about upholding the purpose too of always protecting child safety, of that always being a focus, of never putting children in harm. So I think you have to look at those interests and do, based on whatever the facts are, and trying to uphold those interests to the best of your ability, making those decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Here, I think that what that line is really getting at is, don't do something if you know that it could be endangering a child's welfare.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I think that's a good lens to kind of look this through. I guess I'm bringing it back to Ms. Sampierre and Dr. Lewis to ensure that when we're doing the PD and when we're doing the training, that's what it's not just that the student is uncomfortable with telling the parent. That's not abuse, or that's not supposed abuse. That's just the kid is just uncomfortable. Whereas endangering the welfare of a child, like serious abuse, physical, like serious, I don't even know. But you do get what I'm saying? Like, just when you mentioned before, like distinguishing the difference between them, that's what I think really needs to happen. But thank you. Thank you for answering those questions.
Dr. Jones.
Ms. Shattuck, Dr. Lewis, Ms. Dampier, now tell me if I'm wrong here. It's how I did it for 40 years. If a child reports abuse to me, I call DCF. I am not the one determining if it is abuse. DCF determines that. And several times, not all the time, I would just get a call from DCF to say whether it was or was not. And that's why I said earlier, I'm going to check on that child every day. I don't want to send a wrong message to staff. And sometimes a teacher come in and say, would you call, Doc? No, they said it to you. I'll be here with you while you call, but it is your responsibility to call. It is DCF's responsibility to make the determination of whether it is abuse or not. Am I correct? Okay.
Yeah, nobody said anything otherwise.
Okay, so before we move on, it's been 2 hours, so I'd like to take a 10-minute break.
Do you mind if I answer a question
Oh, I'm
previously
sorry, go ahead.
asked?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to butt in. Thank you, Chairwoman. You had previously asked what our policy is regarding notifying parents if law enforcement
Yes,
takes a
thank you.
child from school, and I looked, and the policy is 5540, which is schools and investigations involving students. And that policy does very specifically speak on that issue. If you scroll down to the bottom of policy 5540, which is the schools and investigations involving students, it does say that attempts to notify the parents regarding investigations of child abuse, neglect, and other law enforcement investigations shall be documented when an authorized law enforcement officer or the DCF removes a student. The principal shall also notify the parents and the superintendent. And it goes on from there. But
Okay,
I
so
just
we have
want to let you
something in
know.
policy then. Thank you. All right, it is 2:06, let's take 10 minutes. We are back in business. I believe we are up to item F. Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item will be presented by Dr. Shafty, so we're going to clap it up for her too, as this is her first presentation in her new role, which is the presentation of the PowerPoint and associated policy with House Bill 1467. Dr. Shafty.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to provide you with an overview of House Bill 1467 to include some data and action steps in compliance with the legislation. So the overview of the bill is to make sure that we are transparent with all things instructional materials, to include the library, media centers, and reading materials. So as we go through these action steps, we will show our commitment to preserve the rights of parents through some of our updates and steps we have in place. We thought it was helpful to show some data about the usage in our media centers. This is in particular one of our high schools. So if you start to on the left side of the screen, that is the total count of materials at Sebastian River High School, 35,064. When we look at last academic year, 697 materials were checked out. When you go to the user level, when you look at specifically our students, 228 students checked books out, and that includes if there's a repeated frequency. So as you can see underneath, 108 students checked out one book, 35 students checked out 2 books, and so on. And when you remove dual enrollment, which there's a course that requires a novel study, calculator checkouts, SAT, or any sort of test prep books, we had 32 traditional checkouts. And traditional would be, I self-selected, I went to the media center, we made up that term, but that's what it would boil down to when you removed almost the required checkouts. So even taking the larger number, 228, that would mean that students at that particular location accessed 0.7% of the books in that media center. So we thought it was helpful to include usage, as that is very critical in the procedures we're about to define. And anytime we have a chance to highlight the great things that Ms. Carrie Wall does, we have that in there, but we thought it would be really prudent to look at how we could reimagine that space, because clearly the space is not being utilized by the #1 user, being our students. So I will ask Ms. Wall to share a little bit about the reimagining of that space.
So what we know with the media centers, especially at the 2 high schools, they are the hub, right? They are the heart of the school. But if the students are not traditionally doing what they used to do, which is check out books, how can we reimagine that space for it to serve all students at the school level? So we did bring this idea of reimagining the media centers to our radar, which is our IT task force. And then our IT committee, and then we created a task force specifically for this. We surveyed teachers, media specialists, coaches, district staff, and then we also surveyed 175 students, asking them what they felt the use of the media center was, what they would like to see in the media centers, and that is what we used to create the requirements for the design. Some of the things that Dr. Shafty brought up was how we can make the space inclusive, how we can bring it up to date. So what we're going to be looking at is redesigning Sebastian River High School with new flooring, new furniture, including school photography, having those small collaboration spaces throughout the media center, both in an open environment and a more private environment, much like you would see the tutoring rooms they have at the public library that students can reserve to use. So those are some of the things we are looking at when we brought in the design team to help us reimagine that space so that students can work. They can work on STEAM, they can work on collaboration, classrooms can come in and work, plus they can utilize the books and the print materials that are available.
Thank you. So looking at the required items of the 1467, the first thing we realized that we had a great opportunity for growth was to elevate our transparency. So this is a screenshot of the webpage that will exist for instructional materials and follow a step-by-step approach to this is what the statute says, and this is how we're providing that transparent layer of accountability. So we will post on here a list of all instructional materials utilized in our school sites, and then the next steps, these are the actual screenshots of what the webpage will look like, so you'll have familiarity with it. These are some updates and additions that we have to remain in compliance with the legislation. All school websites now in the I Want To quick link have search school library materials right now. The statute requires that of elementary schools, but we went ahead and all schools have it. All of our locations have that. We added to our student access form for our libraries and media centers an opt-in for please restrict my child from checking out all materials currently under review. You can keep that in mind as we talk about procedures in the policy that will be coming forward. That makes sense for anyone who has pause or any sort of concerns about those materials. And then our reconsideration form, we're transitioning from paper to electronic to help with state reporting. That will be something starting in 2023 that we'll have to submit to the state, and that will be another transparent layer. All reconsiderations will be directed to that form, and we'll have the form in its purest state. So as you can see from all of these, centralizing these access points for our families really helps elevate that parent voice to one location. They won't have to search all over the website. It will reside here on one page. So our next steps will be to move to public hearing, policy 2522, and I'll talk through that, but I know that you are quite familiar with it. Before I talk it through, I just want to thank you for your patience. That was the first policy I was able to write in my new role, and your feedback and expertise was quite helpful in getting through the process. So as we look at policy 2522, the first page of it is very much driven from instructional material statute. There's nothing in there that we interpreted. It's really very much by the book. We are really leveraging parents returning to the school site as the first form if they have an issue. So we found it to be very important, and when we shared it with our principals, they were very happy that a lot of the concerns that we had, there was an escalation straight to the district, and when we went back to the principal, they were unaware, or they did not have an opportunity to address it at the school site. So part of this policy is we are asking our families to, if they have a concern about any instructional material, just to begin with the principal. Because if they could recommend, for example, an alternate text, or if they're just aware of the issue, some of that problem solving can be much more immediate as opposed to elevating at the district level. So that's written in there first. But the next layer of this is the district level appeal process if the issue is not remedied at the school. So beginning on pages 2, 3, and 4, as if you printed the policy, that is what will happen if the reconsideration is not successful at the school site and it needs to be elevated to the district level. We will establish a committee to oversee that. So there are kind of the selection of members, membership. We walked through all of that with the policy, and you gave us really great feedback to make sure it's clear, it's grammatically correct, and again, in alignment to the statute. And then once this policy goes to public hearing and is approved, we need to make sure that our existing policies, so this is our challenge policy, but what about the selection of instructional materials? That would be 2520. We want to make sure there's alignment and our policies are not contradicting themselves. So after this policy is in place, we will conduct a full review to make sure that we are succinct with our expectations. And then our next step will also be the state will release an online training program for anyone who selects instructional materials. The earliest we anticipate receiving that will be January 1st, but they also have into June of next year. So once we have that information released, we will move swiftly to go through that training program. We have shared this information preliminary with our principals and our APs last week. We look forward to having a professional learning session with our media specialists on August 5th for the district-wide Professional Development Day. And we're just very committed to making sure that we do this right. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, board members. Mrs. Rosario.
Thank you. So thank you for all of this. Thank you for the work that you all have put in to create this new policy 2522 for the challenges, also known as the objections, right? The objection process. The 2520, policy 2520, the selection of adoption and instructional materials, do you suppose we're going to, because there's another one that I mentioned earlier with Mrs. Dampier that needs to come back to us because it needs to be kind of aligned with the current, is that going to come back to us pretty soon? Because I think it should be pretty quick to just kind of red line things out. The other reason why I want to, before just bringing it back to us with a red line, what I think needs to be in what we need to identify in here. The selection of adoption instructional materials really talks about the selection of the math, selection, adopted textbooks, ELA textbooks, next year is social studies and civics, but it doesn't really clearly highlight the selection criteria of library and media center books. So what we have right now, and I think this is a good opportunity to share it with the public who are listening, what we have right now is a really great first step to creating the what do we do when someone has an objection to it at the district level? What we don't have is the objection process at the school level. So that we don't have yet, right?
Well, they will start at the school level to share any concerns that they have about the material, whether it be a library book or a state-adopted instructional material.
But that's not here. That's not captured here. This is just district-level appeals. So what I think we need to add somewhere is what happens at the school level. Just a procedure, something that says at the school level, this happens first. If a parent has an objection, it goes to the teacher, and then it escalates to the principal, and then if nothing gets addressed, then it comes to the district. I think that just that portion, and in kind of taking a look at it, I had not thought about, I know we talked about it privately. Does it say it?
I think you might have, did you print your updated version before Friday?
I think so.
So
Why, am I
the
missing
Friday
it?
update has that in it.
Oh, it has it in there? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, let me take a look. I'll take a look. So if it does, that's great. And then so going back to the selection of adoption of instructional materials, I think we just need to make sure that we identify what the selection of library and media center materials should be. That is not clear in the 2520. Okay, so I'll take a look at this one again, because I know you guys have been updating. Thank you for that. I had an idea for the re-envisioning of the libraries. I don't know if you all have probably talked about it, but public libraries now have this space in them that are 3D printing friendly for anyone who uses the public libraries. They have a 3D printer, they have, the paper cutter, the laminating machine, all of the materials that are necessary, the paper is even there. Really, a student just needs to show up and have an idea, connect, I think, their computer with the printer, and then voila, they have this 3D thing that they've created. Maybe we can think about something like that as well, so that there is a workstation or an area where students could just be free to create, right? And then if they have projects, like science projects, have a station that, they can actually create it there, where there are 3D presentation boards available in those letters that get put on those boards, or whatever the requirements are. I know a lot of students don't have the access to participate in a science fair at home, or they don't have the materials to participate at home. But if they have a space in the school building that they can work on it while in school, keep it there, and if they don't want to bring it back and forth, that might be another area to kind of extend from that. Just a little thought process, just thinking out loud. Quiet areas and study areas, if we're going to re-envision libraries and bring students in, it's going to get quite noisy. So other students who might want a little quiet place to study, right, without the disruption, or read without the chaos, can we ensure that there are going to be some quiet stations somehow or another? The list of instructional materials, I'm going to go back to that presentation. Elevating transparency, and on the PowerPoint you had a slide that says view the list of instructional materials. Can you just remind me again, or repeat again, because I may have missed it, exactly what that list is going to lead parents to? So they click on a link, where are they going?
So it's going to take them to a searchable by grade level state-adopted curriculum. So if they wanted to see what their first grader has as their state-adopted ELA curriculum, the spreadsheet will have the title of the publication as well as the publisher, so that they're very clear what we use.
And are supplemental materials going to be on there as well?
So we are very, very much encouraging our teachers to stay with the state-adopted curriculum. When they go through and elect to use supplemental material, there's an approval process for that as well. That's heavily vetted by the principal, and then subsequently Mrs. Becerra or the line of the chain of communication.
So when we are differentiating instruction, which is what I'm told that we are doing, which I would love for us to be a differentiated instructional district that goes through the full process of that. The materials that a teacher would use might not always align, and it might not just be only supplemental, maybe it would be, right? To be an additional material to provide for a student of a parent who has an objection, and/or of a student who's at a different level, right? So you can teach the same skill with different pieces of different reading materials, for example. One might come from the approved adopted textbook, and then one might come from somewhere else. So I get that it has to be pre-approved, but in the planning process, as teachers are preparing their lessons in advance, would that stuff be accessed on the instructional, I would assume that it would be, on the instructional materials list? The differentiated instructional materials.
You bring up a great question, and we have district-approved supplemental materials, and I think off the top of my head, things like Sonday in our primary grade levels, things like that. We do have district-approved supplemental, which will also make it to this website. I think what Dr. Shafty is referring to is if a teacher goes outside of the scope of our curriculum and finds curriculum that they think will help their students, there is an approval process that they will go through for that process to happen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And then I had a question back to Dr. Shafty, the difference between reconsideration and objection. What would you define the difference between those two as? Or are they the same?
They are one and the same.
Okay. Okay. So reconsideration would be, I think we kind of talked about having reconsideration at the school level, just to distinguish between the two levels. Reconsideration is a school is going to reconsider a particular material because a parent has an objection to it. At the district level, it would be the challenges or the objection process, right?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Are you done?
Yes, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay. All right. Any other board members like to speak? Dr. Jones?
When I look at all the information, thank you. I know this is a lot of detail and a lot of work. I attended the assistant principal meeting on Friday at Storm Grove, and we started talking about these state statutes. A lot of questions came up, and they were good questions. Dr. Morg, just going back a little bit, how many families in our district have said our children cannot access any library books?
Through the chair, I think at the end of the school year, I think it was 12 to 15.
Okay. When I look at this and look at all the state statutes that we now need to follow, and I'll have a few comments on the committee, just in general, when you look at, and you know how much I love my Sharks, when you look at 32 flippin' books checked out with 1,800 students, they're not going to the library to read. Now, believe me, technology, I have kids and grandkids, they're on their Kindle or whatever they may be. Ms. Wall just helped me with my MySpace account last week. But anyway, I'm thinking to myself, I know. But anyway, we're missing the boat. Forget everything else that we have to go through now. We're missing the boat for what we need to do for our students. Now, I saw a little bit more information on elementary checkout and so forth, and I can't remember what it was at Vero Beach High School. But we have to totally re-envision that. And I know we've got some media specialists can do that. We all know they're not going there to check out the regular books. So that's my main issue when you look at all this. When I look at the district committee, and I've said this before, I want that and I know it looks like a board member will each get one person, we have a media specialist and so forth. I want to make sure that it's a diverse committee that represents this community in every respect. That's number one. Because when we look at things, and one thing they have in the district committee, we want to make sure there's no bias. You know, we've got to be very, very careful when we accept books from others, and I know donations come in all the time. You know, we have to be aware of that. Now, here's a question I want to ask. When's the last time a media specialist was able to order a book or anything?
We were moving through this process last year, and knowing that we're still pending information from the state, I want to say it was January or February, we asked them to hold off on ordering, and we gave the assurances to the media specialists at that time. That money, as well as their total allocation for this school year, would remain intact. So as we go through the process for this year, we'll be able to really begin to look at which books we want to order, while at the same time looking at the volume of books that we currently have that are not being used. And
right.
I think it's important to note, as Ms. Wall presented her information, I would encourage each of you, after school starts, because she's pretty busy prior to the opening of schools, schedule with her and see some of the designs and concepts that are in place for these two media specialists. We'll go back and taking that and vetting some of that really innovative things, some of the things that you said, Ms. Rosario, we have captured. Other things I saw Gary feverishly writing as you were sharing some of those ideas. It is really, really innovative, and I'll remind the board, this board tasked me to look at innovating those two particular spaces. So we've got to look at the volume of books that are just not being used to bring in some of the innovative, neat things that Carrie has in mind, as well as Ms. Rosario was sharing. There needs to be a weeding process or a reduction of books that are just sitting there not being used.
And there's one other thing on the committee. So let's say we get time to order our books. Are we going through every book that we order?
As referenced, we will bring a full policy review. There will be a process to vet books in order to ensure that would be school site specific by the media specialist. There's training being provided by the Florida Department of Education in order to ensure what we're putting on our shelves is aligned to the state's expectations as well as this board's expectation. So there's still a little bit of waiting time, not to redo work or be redundant in asking folks to do things twice or three times.
Right.
That we're willing to do. As you know, our media specialists have been off enjoying their families, taking a well-deserved break, and they're going to come back to a heaping load of work waiting for them to ensure that we have everything in place.
Isn't that training by January of 23 that they have to have January of 23? But we really can't order books until all that training has been completed?
Based on the statute, the selection of any new materials needs to be vetted by someone with the certification that an educational media specialist would have.
Right.
That training could be released as early as January 1st, but they also have a little bit of a window, and it could be as late as either June or July of 2023.
Okay, and there's some questions at the principals meeting about class libraries at, especially elementary. They just live with those libraries. So where are we on? Do we have to go through all those libraries?
So we do have a process that we're putting into place. The answer to that question is yes. We want to ensure that the parent understands the information that's being exposed to their children. We want teachers to know what can and cannot be exposed to students, and we want the district to be protected as a whole. So we have created a process that we're pushing out to schools in order to ensure we are on the up and up, completely transparent. Everyone is well informed regarding the content we're putting in front of our students. I'll ask Dr. Shafty to quickly review some of that procedure.
Sure. So we do have a form in place. We're working on the mechanism with which to have oversight of accountability, but the form has our commitment to staying in alignment with the statute. The form will progress to say, I either maintain a classroom library or I do not. If they do not maintain a classroom library, the form, hopefully, the way we envision it, would close. But if they do choose to maintain a classroom library, we did outline, based on state statute, all of the aspects and criteria that they need to be aware of. The form allows for uncertainty. They can select it either does and the material is removed and handed to the media center, or they can select I'm unsure, and then it's also removed in a space that does not hold our teachers in a place where we want to protect our teachers, and we were not comfortable saying no classroom libraries. So this process allows them the choice. They can maintain one in compliance with the statute, or they can elect to not maintain one. But we will know either way of their decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Schiff or Mr. Barefoot?
Yeah,
Dr.
my
Schiff?
only comment, and to some degree this was covered in Dr. Jones's comments, is, and this will be up to the committee for how they do that, is how we determine and evaluate bias-free content, which will depend on, as Dr. Jones mentioned, a diverse representative of the committee, but also that the committee will have to, as one of its first obligations, determine how it will do that, whether it will be by consensus, will it be by vote, how will they make those assessments, and what will constitute bias-free. So I'm sure that direction will be given at the time, but that's predominantly, everything else has been covered in individual meetings, except for that one I remain attentive to.
Mr. Barefoot?
Yeah, the comment, first of all, I'm, I guess, shocked at the number of material that are available and how little is being used. Sort of a sad commentary. And what you hope, although I'm skeptical, is that there's a lot of that, the need being filled with technology, but I fear that there's too much watching of TikTok and not enough of what I'll call educational related material, and what a shame. And I'm sure you know this, but universities, colleges have been going through this transforming libraries for 10 years. And there's more models out there. There's been more money spent, and a lot of it, if they had to redo it, and some have had to redo it, they made mistakes along the way. Now the age groups are a little different. And I think there's a much more teamwork and collaboration emphasized at the college and university level. So you have workspace for, let's call it study teams, 5, 6 people. And education at that level is more like a job. Education at the elementary and secondary school level is probably as much social interaction as it is learning, which is a big part, of course, of learning. So I would just, and I'm sure you've done this, but there are consultants, there are a lot of, and you're dealing with a population in these schools that mirrors a lot of the smaller colleges. I mean, you go up into the New England area and you go to the NESCAC schools, which is the Williams, the Amherst, the Middleburys, the Bowdoin, the Bates, et cetera, et cetera. Those school populations are very similar to what you're talking about here. So how did they organize the space to accommodate the numbers? Not just the activities, which will be different, at the college level than you're going to find at the high school level. But, and I would offer for those kids that go on to college, being exposed to a college-like library environment before they get there will make that transition a whole lot easier. So in your research, and I can probably be somewhat helpful. I don't know the who's, but I can put you in touch with someone who will know, give you maybe some ideas on organizations or even some schools that have gone through this and had to change, a year or two out and maybe avoid making some mistakes that others have made in the past. All right, just my thoughts, but I think it's great. I think you're absolutely on the right track.
Okay, so I have a few things. I know that when you first brought up the forms and the parents that filled them out, there were, I think, 90 and 5 said, they didn't want access to their books. So it would be helpful, I think, for board members to see, what parents are concerned, who filling out forms, what is happening with those forms, maybe at the end of the year versus what we were given when all this was going on before. You mentioned you did a survey. Were those 175 students just at Sebastian River High School?
They were both high schools.
Both high schools, so they were all high school students that were in the survey.
So the survey, we were just getting feedback for what, it was to give the design teams a focus on what the students felt was important. And we asked them questions like, what kind of print materials there should be. Do you want computers? Do you want desktop computers or laptop computers? Do you want high top seating? The high table seating? Do you want soft seating? Some things we expected, some things we didn't, and we were surprised. And we actually changed what we asked the design companies to give us based on that. What it was just getting that initial feedback from the students. Going forward for the next 4 months, Dr. Moore has planned out for us to get in front of students again, specifically Sebastian students, now that we're looking at their media center, the superintendent, student advisory council, and to get more concrete feedback before we commit to a design.
I know as a past experience as a teacher teaching 4th and 5th grade, when students were doing science fair projects, let's say, it would be helpful if I could have sent them as a group working together to the library and said, do your research there, work together collaboratively, but the answer was always no. And the reason why is because that librarian was tasked with teaching students, so they couldn't watch those kids for me. So that was a concern at the elementary level. It sounds like at the high school level, though, that's not that concern.
And like Dr. Moore said, I'm happy to, to meet with you and show you the presentation, but I can tell you that the focus in the redesign is collaboration, is the media specialist assisting students with things like research and collaboration, and there is space for STEAM.
That's what it should be. It should be a place where we send students that they can collaborate, they can work together. Absolutely.
They have things where you pull walls together to make rooms, and
Yeah. Nice. I can't wait to see it. So, thank you for all the all school search materials links. I know that in statute it said just elementary schools, so I appreciate the fact that you've opened it up to middle schools and high schools. I think that's important with everything that has happened for the transparency, so thank you for that. What happens when, in the future, because before, when a book was objected to, the book was put on a shelf in the media center office, right? So that it wasn't on the shelf for students. What happens with those books now, moving forward? Because I don't see where that's going to have anything in here. And I was going to ask this question.
So we have that in the policy as well. We want to maintain a level of fiscal responsibility. The members of the district committee will need physical copies of the book if available. So the first kind of attempt will be if a material is selected for district level review, we would use our existing inventory to pull that material, because either way, they need to review the actual physical copy with the same ISBN number. But then after that, if a student wishes to check out any books currently under review, they would have that note in focus that says they can or cannot check
Where's the
out
book
that
lie,
material.
though? Where does the book sit?
The remaining books will remain on the shelf.
On the shelf, not in the office of the media center? Is that because, who makes that decision? Is that a board decision, or is that?
That's how it is written in the policy that's before you now. So the books that are available for each of the members of the committee, you use those books first. And then following that, if there are any books still on the shelf, those books ultimately require permission from the parent.
So that's in the policy here. Is that in the statute that says that, or is that the interpretation of the statute?
No, that's a procedure that we're putting in place over here.
It's a procedure. So I guess my question would be, I think the board members have expressed in the past,
Mine?
board members have expressed in the past their concern about books.
Turn it on.
Your mic, okay. Board members have expressed in the past their concern about where the book's sitting while it's being judged. And I really feel like maybe that might be a school board part that we put in the policy. I know it's a procedure, I get that. But procedures follow policy, and I know that that's something that's come up several times with all of us on the dais in the past. So my concern would be, is that something that we should vote on, or is that just going to be part of the procedure?
Just to be clear, we have embedded the procedures into the policy, so it is binding in terms of the action the system or the district or the superintendent has to take. So that is written in the policy, where we've included the procedures that would be followed. So it does say, just as Dr. Shafty voiced, that would be the system that would be in place.
I personally, this board member has a concern with that, because I feel like if it's potentially a book that would be removed while it's being objected to, if I'm a parent that says, I don't want my child to take that book out, I don't want my child to have their hands on that book then. So I know when we were going through this before, those books were put in the office, and a parent that was fine with it, that child can check out the book from the library, from the librarian. But I have a personal problem with the book sitting on the shelf. I do. I'm not done, Mrs. Rosario, please. The next thing.
No one's interrupted you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were putting your hand up like I want to speak.
I was, but no one was interrupting you.
Okay. All right, so the next thing I want to bring up is timeline, the idea about these that is now sweeping the nation, because I've been looking at this, of what different libraries are doing across the nation, not just school libraries, but public libraries. And you'll notice our public libraries have STEM carts. If you haven't noticed, please go notice. STEM carts can be checked out by families, they can be checked out by a group that comes in, they can be checked out by individuals, and not just with laminating and all that stuff, but with some STEM things, microscopes and things like that. So it would be nice if those were available, because a lot of times as a science teacher, I'm going to just go to science for right now. I'm working with biology, let's say, and the students are working on histology, looking at individual cells on a plate, and I won't give them a project or whatever. They want to go on and look at cells themselves. They don't have that opportunity unless they make a time to come in and see me, versus having that opportunity to go to the library and get that same ability to do that. Wouldn't that be cool? So I'm really thinking outside the box here with talking to our teachers about what they wish was in there. I remember when I was a teacher and the librarian would say, I've got X number of dollars, which wasn't much, give me titles of books that you'd like. And I'd say, oh, great, because I'm doing this study and I'm doing this and we're learning about the coral reef. Oh, I can't buy that because we got to buy this instead. We got to buy all the books that, have the medals and all that stuff. We can't do what, even though it was voiced to us, it really wasn't a partnership between the classroom teacher and the media, because their funding was very limited. I get that. But if you're thinking outside the box here, and we're really thinking about revisioning this, then I think we need to also talk to the teachers and what their needs are, because they might say the same thing that I just said, which is, I wish my kids have access to microscopes, not just in my classroom. or something else. And I'm not worried about the media centers not being able to order materials right now, because if they have 35,000 volumes sitting there, haven't been used yet, not buying another 300 right now isn't a urgent thing, unless, of course, they have to buy Newberries and Caldecots and all that stuff. I get that. But I think that maybe holding that money and being able to do some innovative things like this is really kind of worth it, to hold on to that money. You know, it's been said that when I brought up the community standard, which was what I asked for, in other words, when we went through all this, parents and community members have a different understanding and a version in their own mind of what's grade appropriate for children. You know, there are some people that allow their kids to watch certain movies and other people that only allow them to watch G-rated movies. I always err on the side of caution, you know. Anybody that came to my house, they had to have permission to watch something. Usually was a G-rated movie anyway. But, you know, the term plan to make a plan has been said about what I came up with this community standard. The reason why I brought that up is because I thought, if we're going to move forward with all this, people have to come to an understanding of what they agree to is grade appropriate. And that, when it boils down to it, that's what it comes down to, is what's appropriate to put in front of children. You may think it's appropriate, you may not think it's appropriate. What are we going to agree to? So I'm glad to see that the state is actually coming up with a state standard. So we don't need a community standard, I guess, unless we want to go above and beyond what the state says. But when is that state standard going to come out of what's grade appropriate for each grade?
So we went to a leadership conference, I think in June, and they were seeking individuals with expertise to serve on that rulemaking. So we do not have a definitive timeline on when we can expect a definition for age appropriate.
Okay, so that's part of the problem here, is people want us to act right away, but sometimes when you act too quickly, you have to pull back because new statutes come down and then you have to redo it. So I'd rather do it correctly. So I'm anxious to see what the state standard's going to come out with. Does the state have all procedures and the PD in place for moving forward? It sounds like some of this stuff is going to be introduced in this fall. It sounds like some of it's going to come out January to June, somewhere in there. So we're kind of at a hold pattern for some of this. At what point, though, can we put this, do we have a timeline for this policy? In other words, at what point are we going to have a committee where we each pick somebody to put on this committee, and we're going to have a committee that's actually looking at books? Because you know when school starts, we're going to have, you know, people concerned about books. So at what point can we move forward with this? Wait, your mic's not on. Can you start over?
I got it. All the way back through the chair. So tonight, we're asking the board to approve this policy. It will then go out for public hearing at our following board meeting, which is next month. Follow the day after that board meeting, we'll do the advertisements for individuals wishing to be selected by each board member to serve on the committee. Going into that upcoming board meeting, we anticipate having all of the remaining policies modified for your review to be approved, which is the whole kit and caboodle, for lack of a better way of saying it, surrounding these specific issues. So we can begin to seat the committee. They can begin doing some of the groundwork, some of their procedural work, some of the training that we can provide for them, and move forward swiftly. So we want to move as fast as we possibly can, but at the same time ensuring that we're not having to redo work or re-review information based on a change of what age appropriate is that's being provided from the state. So there's a lot of things that we can do after we approve this policy to really, you know, kind of lead from the front, for lack of a better way of saying it, that we are moving as fast as we possibly can, but safeguarding the opportunity not to have to redo work or by any means expose students to any content that their parents would not want them to have.
Okay, so we're not going to just wait until all of it comes out from the state. We're going to start moving. Good. And that brings me back to my other concern, which is about the books that are being objected to while this committee is being formed and moving along. So is there going to be that list in focus that says this book has been objected, or how's it going to say?
Let me read directly from the policy, because I think as it is written, I think we are in a pretty good place. In preparation for its review, challenge materials will be provided to the members of
Where
the
are you?
District
I'm sorry,
Objection Committee.
'cause-
I'm on page 3, section E, procedures. It is in yellow in my copy.
Okay.
So I'll start over. In preparation for its review, challenge materials will be provided to members of the District Objection Committee from the current circulation of inventory. So if there's 11 members on there, if we have 11 books, we'll pull 11 books. If we have to go out and get 4 more, then we'll have to go out and get 4 more. But as you have noted, it has to be the exact same book, ISBN number that is actually in the library, so we're reviewing the actual material itself. During the entirety of the district-level appeal process, any remaining inventory of the challenge materials will be require parent approval before a student can check out the material. So what that means is it's just not the opt-in or opt-out. It is bringing up a book that is being reviewed, because books will come on to review and books will come off of review throughout the year. It will be a fluid process, so we'll have to create a system so the media specialist or aide who is checking out the book that says, I need to inform the parent that this book is being reviewed prior to checkout, unless the parent already says, hey, I give permission for my child to check out books that are being reviewed. So I think the way that it is written, it is leading with choice from parents regarding objectionable material. And in the case in which the form hasn't been completed, or it's not completed, we would be required, based on how this is written, to get permission.
So is that because if you anticipate 1,000 books coming forward, then we'd have 1,000 books being pulled?
I have never thought of it being 1,000 books, but the answer to that question is yes. And I really want to honor the time of staff, while at the same time honoring the choice of parents. And I think this allows us to create a mechanism in order to do both. So there will not be books checked out that are being reviewed unless the parent gives the okay for it to happen.
Okay, so let me ask this question, I think it's of you. So, when I stepped into that role for a year, I know when I did a checkout with Follett, if I gunned the book, which is what we called it, hitting it with a little gun, and it popped up red in Follett saying that, this book is not available for checkout for that child. Is that how it comes up now?
I don't know what.
Through the chat, I don't think we could speak through what the actual, there is a flag that comes up that notifies the media specialist this is a hands-off book, or this child doesn't have these permissions. So we've
Okay.
already created the system where any books that are on that have been moved from elementary to middle, you can list titles of books that they can't check out. There's a great deal of flexibility.
I just want to make sure there's a
We have-
very unique way to stop a child from getting access to a book that's objected to.
That is in place,
Okay?
or will be in place.
Do you want this? I can give the specifics. What happens in Follett is it actually flags the child, not the book. So when the student's ID number is entered, it says this student has restrictions.
Right, right.
And then the media specialist goes to focus to see what those book restrictions are.
So if you, I don't like to use the word gun, but if you
Scan 'em.
hit, okay, if you scan, thank you. If you scanned the ID of the child, right? And then it comes up, and then you scan the book, are they connected at all to what their permissions are?
No, the media specialist has to go into focus to see which books are listed as having an exception for that student. Is
So
it
will it
all?
have-
Is it certain?
Will it say that anything on the objected list? Okay. I just want to make sure that that's being stopped, so that kids are protected if their parent says they don't want them having access to any of those books.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Dr. Schiff?
I just want to respond to something that you said, which is the notion of the state giving guidance versus community guidance and standards and norms. And I want to go back to, I think you originally, some time ago, suggested a way of assessing that in the community, a community group or something, which I think is, when the state gives us guidance, that's helpful. But counties are very different. Broward County is different than Palm Beach, is different than Indian River, is different than Leon, is different than Glades. So state standards cannot really address implementation in an individual community or even to the level of individual schools. So while that's a starting point, I don't know that I'd say that's an ending point, and would actually go back to your idea that I don't think that the state direction obviates the needs for local community input.
Right, so that community standard that I brought up before, I'm assuming that this committee might come up with that, I'm not
Would
sure.
presumably reflect, yes, would, to the degree, and is it the intention that this committee is a true reflection of the community? Then, yes, then this committee would hopefully meet that standard.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Rosario?
Yeah, I want to be clear about the community standard, that the community standard, that the committee is functioning under the eyes of the law, first and foremost, using the law as their filter, not their personal opinions. Dr. Moore?
Yeah, it would be policy looking at state statute and just not someone's opinion. We've had a number of opinions provided that are all legal opinions, but yes, based on policy, based on law.
Okay, thank you. I do have some other questions or statements here that I wanted to bring up. The form, Dr. Shafty, you mentioned the form that is being drafted now to be given to staff, to teachers, so they can check their school libraries to ensure that classroom libraries do not have some of these materials that are prohibited in the classrooms. I'm trying to think of the right words. Are we going to be able to see that when it's done? Are you going to show it to us, in a workshop? Are we going to see what that looks like then? And the presentation that we heard about earlier, I'd love to see that presentation as well.
Through the chair, as we reconvene, I would be more than happy to show the outcomes of those particular things. So I think the protocol that's been created really leads the teacher through a thought process regarding, is this something that is really non-negotiable in terms of being okay to expose children to, or do I have questions or concerns? And it runs them through the various scenarios, whether it be critical race theory, because there is a rule on that, whether it be pornography, runs them through that. So it leads them more through a thought process and takes them to a place where they have any kind of hesitation or concern. They could seek additional guidance from the media specialist who will be attending that training and then providing feedback to them when it's most appropriate.
Thank you. No, I know that I've seen it. I've seen it when we met personally, privately, but in the effort to be transparent with the public who have had objections to the entire process, that's what I just wanted to, rather than rely on, no, we are definitely doing so. Well, we're doing something and this is what it looks like.
Absolutely.
That's the only reason why
Absolutely.
I was asking. I love the form. I love the idea. I love the detail that's in it. I think it's definitely another check in the box of moving forward to complying with being transparent with our curriculum and with our library books. So it's definitely a good move forward. Donations, there was I think that I heard something about we've received donations. We have not, according to what I understand, we have not received donations lately with regard to libraries or library books. I know that there was a donation that was offered, but I don't believe that the district received them yet. Am I right?
Through the chair, I think you're speaking of one entity, but there are numerous entities throughout our community who are donating books or would like to donate books. So as we receive them, we can be in receipt of them, but before they have to go through this process that we're in the process of yes.
Okay, so we want to make sure that we create that review of the selection of materials and make sure that library selection materials vetting process is in here before we actually receive the donations.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I think, I'm wondering, without waiting until December, without waiting until January or the proposed January date for the training from the Department of Education, I'm wondering if there might be exceptions if we provide for them, and I'm thinking out loud, so bear with me, if we provide for them, once this policy is passed and we have our selections process aligned with statute, I'm wondering if we can provide this as proof that we are, along with the check-in list or the checkout list for the checklist for the classroom libraries, if we can provide this for the Department of Education to allow us temporary release to begin purchasing new aligned books. Maybe we don't have to wait until January. Maybe we can prove that we are one of the first districts to get ahead of, the curve here, where other districts, I believe, are really not even as far as we are in the process.
No, through the chair, I'm pretty comfortable we'll be able to begin ordering books because 98% of them have no issues or no concerns. No one's ever going to question. So we have to get media specialists back. We have to look at it, and there are books in which it would be of concern, in which we need additional support, but there are simple resources that we could provide that 100% align to our curriculum, are supplemental to our curriculum. But we need to have those who are charged in making those decisions and beginning that process and have a level of comfort
Trained,
from
yeah.
them. Because ultimately, they're the ones who have that certification, they have that training. I can't speak because to their level of comfort in making an order or making a selection, because they have that state certification without going to that specific training. My assumption is they would be more than comfortable saying, this book is right down the middle of the road. It is 100% supporting this. This is a classroom, third grade, aligned to the standards piece of material. I just don't want to speak for them. I want to assess that as soon as we have them back. I think that's some of the information we'll be able to bring back to the board at our next meeting.
Thank you for that. I think that a few parents have shared with me their concerns over some summer reading lists that were provided for their kids. And based on the very few that I have talked with, the selection of books, there aren't any about or around the topic of career or vocational training or career focus or any of that. I think when you move forward in the training process of the Library Media Center Specialist on August 5th, I would love for you all to consider adding to that discussion the importance of ensuring that the books have an equal amount of, or a much broader amount of books that address or that teach or that talk to the subject of career, technical training courses that are out there. If we want students to not, we know that not all students are college bound, but why not also provide an extensive, variety of those kinds of books as well. And from what I understand in previous workshops through citizens that have spoke about it or have done research on Follett, that there were very, very, very few books in our libraries that really address that. So I think that would be pretty important as well. There was a statement about the all-school website search, the search for school library materials. That's not new. That's always been on Follett. So if you go directly onto that Follett Learning through the district website, you can select all school search. So or you can select independent schools and select a book through that process.
Yes, ma'am. It takes you to there, but now every school's website has a quick link to follow.
Beautiful. And when is that going to be up and running?
Done.
It's up and running now? Okay, that I'm glad to hear that. Let me see what else. And I just wanted to say a last comment on the parents opting out. There was a question about how many parents opt out and how many don't. I know quite a few parents who don't want to opt out of something that they wholeheartely believe is an illegal process, or allowing books that are inappropriate to students, that they just, it's like, I'm not putting my student in that situation, so I don't want to opt out. So it's not that parents are allowing, some parents are not, they're just not saying, yes, you can go in there, or they don't want their students to go in, and therefore I think what I'm saying is some parents are refusing to fill out that opt-out form because they don't agree with the entire process of it, right? And the fact that they believe that there is a potential liability for legal issues, giving permission for their child to allow for the books or not, and then giving an opportunity for the child to be singled out. I know some parents have this concern. Whether I agree with it or not, I'm just sharing it out loud because I just want to make it clear that not everybody is black or white. Some people are somewhere in the middle with gray, and you might have some parents in there who feel that way about this entire process of opting in and opting out. But other than that, I'm proud to support this new policy, and I'm eager to get it started. So thank you.
All right, thank you for your hard work on this.
And many more policies to come, Dr. Shafi. Thank you very much. And now, speaking about other policies, the last item, Madam Chair, is Doc Jones' item, and it is hers to present, and we'd gladly answer any questions or support you as needed.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, school board members. As most of you know, I'm a board member serving on the DSEG work group, and the judge decreed for us to do that, and it was a change from the equity committee. And it's been good work, and it's been hard work, and it's been detailed work. Our next meeting is tomorrow. Digging into the data, I think we all know that we want the same result, to close the gap. We are back in court on September 8th, and I know Dr. Moore updates the board as so needed with that. Looking at the DSEG orders from 67 and 94, and then the joint plan in 2018, the joint plan talks about making progress. And I believe we've done so in some areas, I really do. But we all know we need to do better with closing the gap. And I think we can move forward. But something really stuck with me during one of these meetings. It was a rep from the NAACP who said, you know, once we get through some things, again, we're starting at the beginning with pre-K, but once we get through some of these things, we're just going to start over. It is never ending, and we can never become complacent. I believe the board sets this policy, we're setting a high standard. And in my opinion, after being here 40-some years, it's time to be proactive instead of reactive. Nothing moves until we get unitary status, and we're talking about all subgroups here. Race, special education, ESE, ELL, socioeconomic. We're looking at everyone. And I'm sure you've all looked at Power BI and looked at our data on that, and you can see we're lacking. I do believe with the new organizational chart, with some shifts, we are in the best place to achieve that now, but we all need to push forward. And I believe as a board, we would be setting a professional educational policy to stay in existence for a minimum of 5 years, again, after unitary status. And we are just not reacting to issues. Now, if you look, I'm sure you all read the policy in detail. If you look at it, same type of work group we have now that was established by the court. It's the same type of work group. And we're just committing to the process to continue. I think it's what we're talking about is what we will do instead of what we won't do. I asked Dr. Mang to get some information, and I will share with the board at a later time. I'm sorry I don't have that now, but if you look on Power BI and you look at our subgroups, we've got a lot of work to do. The one thing I want to alert you to is the board commitment on this new policy, and if you don't mind me reading it. The school board in all schools in our system shall take active measures to maintain high expectations for all students to eliminate persistent disparities in the academic performance of individual student subgroups based on race and ethnicity. Active measures shall be defined as those which promote equitable, inclusive, and supportive educational environments that are free from discrimination. I know you saw that I brought something earlier on sustainability policy, and now we're looking at all of the groups here. And I just think as we move into this new school year after a couple really tough years, that we make this commitment. Whether any of us here in 5 years or the new board looks at some things differently, this will be set in policy so that we will continually monitor this for all of our students. We're a diverse school district, and I'm very proud of that. We have a great parent group supporting, and I think it's just time to move on from that, to move on forward with that. And before I even ask for board questions, if you don't mind, if Dr. Moore or Dr. Shafty would just like to share a few things that you can from the work group to let us know why you think this may be important.
Through the chair, I'll start, and Dr. Shafty, you're more than welcome to add onto my statement. I think the policy provides a clear and unwavering expectation by the board that this is a priority. I will share some information this evening during my presentation and looking at our achievement by different subgroups. And you'll see improvements in those rankings, but still in the bottom 50% across the state. So we're moving up, but we're not moving up to where we need to be when it comes to our different subgroups. So putting a focus in on the gaps across the entire system really ensures that we are being best by all kids. When you look at this policy that you have crafted, it is a very strong policy. It guides the work of the superintendent, as all policies do. There are certain expectations that must be upheld. It ensures that we continue to move the work forward, just not to be done with the desegregation order. That is absolutely not at all the intent of this policy. It is solely to continue and build upon the work. I think the work that is being done in the established work group is very focused. It is really digging into a specific area, which is student achievement. It is sharing and discourse regarding some of the outcomes that we've had historically, and really putting all things aside and working collaboratively to dig deep in terms of what are the root cause issues and what do we have to have. So I look forward to continuing to work with the work group and really building and problem solving over the course of however long it needs to be. But to have this in place is a strong statement that we take this work seriously, and we who serve all children, regardless of the zip code, are doing things in a way which ensures every single student has the opportunity to maximize their full potential. Dr. Shafty?
Studies on districts that are in situations where they're under any sort of compliance, whether it be through a desegregation order or not, they revert backwards, trend-wise. So to have something like this in place for the stage that we're at really sends a strong message that it's our mission. It's what we say we do. We transform for all students. So having something like this memorializes the work that's being done now, so it becomes part of the fabric moving forward, and it's not lost.
Just a couple of things, Ms. Berenborg. Dr. Shafty just alluded to this. Of the 67 counties, 6 are in litigation like we are. 26 have unitary status, and 35, it's never been an issue under litigation or anything. And if you take a look at the achievement gap, many, many, many who are already in unitary status or never had an issue have a wider gap than we do. And we just talked to a couple of counties, when you talk to them and even the responses they get, well, we achieved that, the board, court said fine, put it on the shelf, okay? This is something I don't want this school district to do, this school board to do. Put it on a shelf. We need to continually look at this. And the mediator, this is nothing, I shouldn't say, said that, you know, he doesn't know of a policy like this, and was very supportive, the one who is a mediator within the work group. And, well, very supportive of this because we will continually look at all students. So I just, you know, obviously would like to hear from you what you think, and I think it's on tonight, whether it goes for 30 days, obviously we'll have time to look at it, but just your thoughts. Thank you, Ms. Barrenborn.
Thank you. Board members? Mr. Barefoot.
Well, I think it's great. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity. And I think you're right, that once you think you've solved the problem, people tend to forget about it. And pretty soon, if you take the time and you look back, you find that, you know, you've slipped. And that's what Dr. Shafty just said the data shows. So I'm 100% behind it.
Okay. Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, pretty much ditto that. Thank you for the context. Thank you for the way in which you presented this, both compared to other districts as well as articulating our ongoing commitment. I think this has been long overdue. I think the efforts we have attempted either through court or through our equity groups have not produced the results we've hoped for. And so rather than doing the same thing and expecting a different result, I think this is an excellent way to inculcate, but to, can't find the right word, ongoingly establish, I'm sure there's a word for that, our commitment to closing this achievement gap, not simply because other districts are doing poorly and are not under court order, but rather because it's our commitment, it's our priority, and it should be our legacy.
Mrs. Rosario?
I think it was a year ago, May, when this came to us, or we started talking about this as a unitary status policy, sustainability policy. I agree with the idea and the premise to commit to the work that is, that we are obligated to address with regard to the court order and the African American Achievement Plan, and obviously closing the achievement gap with our African American students and others, and other group of students. I have, for a long time, talked about the achievement gap between our Hispanic students and everyone else, and I have forever said that is a very, very large gap as well. So there are always going to be achievement gaps with students, just like you're always going to have your lowest quartile. It doesn't matter where you are. You will always have, even if your lowest quartile of students, you know, increases and is now no longer lowest quartile, you're still always going to have a bottom quartile. And so addressing the quartile or the achievement gap of students based on cohort is something that I don't see here. And I think that having a district eye on closing the achievement gap is great and all, but I just think that could be something that the superintendent can create his own committee to do. I just don't see the need of creating a policy for that. If the policy was strictly to address the items that are in our court order, I can see that it would align well. But right now, we have a mix of different things in here, and there's so many items that have been added, and a lot of items have been taken away, that now the focus of this work group, even though we are mentioning, even though in here the purpose is to address the desegregation order of 1967 and to ensure compliance with that, with the requirements of that court order, it then goes into say that we are going to establish a work group to review the achievement gap of all students, not just your African-American students. So I'm at a little bit of a quandary. The purpose of the work group, according to the court order, was to address the items that were in the court order, to be compliance with the items that are in the joint plan, rather. We met every single item except for two. It's my, right? Okay. We met every single item recently when we went to court in March. Got it? Except for mentoring of teachers in the African-American community, or rather teachers who are African-American. So the mentoring portion of the new teachers and instructional staff. And then the other item that we did not meet was the African-American students in higher courses, no?
Student achievement.
Student achievement, okay. So if this were addressing all of the items in the joint plan, or even those two items that are still missing to focus to begin now, I would say that would be great. Then let's just do that. Let's create a policy that says we are now going to focus on addressing the two items so that we can meet unitary status compliance, work alongside the NAACP and get the work done. But that's not what I see here. What I see here is a commitment that won't go into effect for another 5 years or 3 months. You know, we don't know when we're going to reach unitary status. And that's my issue, is, again, putting the cart before the horse. Not that the intent to address these issues is not important. It's the creating a policy that seems to be in a rush, just to say that we're in the commitment to do it, and then throw in all of the other aspects of all students instead of specific to the joint plan, or monitoring to make recommendations, again, specific to what's in the most recent court order. It's very, it feels a little all over the place. It feels like we're piecemealing things together just to say that we're going to make a commitment and then not have it go into effect until whenever. So here's my other concern too. A year ago, there was an incredible push and a rush to create a sustainability policy just to say that we needed to do that and make the commitment. A year later, it's now completely changed into something like this because of a court order. What's to say there wouldn't be another court order in another month or 2 or 3 months or 6 months or a year from now that'll say, forget about the work group, you'll do something else. Or you'll be required to do something else. And so then we would have to come back to this policy, which has not taken effect yet, and recreate something else again, because we were putting the cart before the horse. So I just think that we're being too premature. I think that if we had a proclamation or a promise or some kind of agreement, like a written contract or something that says that we promise to do this, that's not written in policy. I mean, policy drives our work. And Dr. Moore, you could do this. You can do an achievement gap group at every single school. The best way, to handle achievement gap is not just necessarily at the district office, but at the school level where they're looking at their own students. So looking at a district-wide achievement gap is great, but unless we bring it back to the schools, I mean, you can do that. You can do that right now without a policy. You can create a citizens work group to do that if you wanted to do. I mean, I don't see the need for this particular in the way that it's written. It says that we're addressing the desegregation order, but then what's written in it is that we're not, that we're then going to look at everything else. So I don't know, I get the idea. I think it's incredibly important that we do commit to the work, but it's something that we are doing, we are committed to it. We have to legally do the work to do it. So I'm not okay with approving or discussing the approval of a policy that won't take effect until whenever. That I have big concerns about that.
Dr. Jones, this is your item. Do you want to respond?
As said earlier, and also in writing, this is enacted after unitary status. And what we're saying then, the composition of the work group, the new work group would be very similar to this, and we will look at all of our subgroups. So I think it's a commitment that's about, let me see, how you're 40, 50 years behind. And I think it is very, very strong when a school board puts this in policy. We will continue with the work group. I'm on it. We will continue with it. You know, someday we hope we get unitary status. We're hoping, and we're working hard. But this is not enacted until after unitary status, so we don't contradict the current work group. So that's just something. And I just think it's important. You're right, we do go by policy, and that is important for us to acknowledge it. We want to, I believe the infrastructure is there right now. We are adhering to minimum requirements in the Joint Plan of 2018, and I'm sure you've all read that many times. They are minimum. We want to sustain those efforts and raise expectations. We want to continue with the mentoring and hiring of important contributors. We want to do our job as far as helping our students. But again, this is enacted after unitary status, so we don't contradict the current work group. I think that all the information on the superintendent's achievement gap work group is very important. We're going to continually look at data, you know, have data drive us. So I think in general, this supports the district unified mission.
Ms. Rosario?
Dr. Moore, the purpose of this work group that's in process right now that only discusses the achievement gap, does it only address the achievement gap with African American students and other groups of students? Or in that current work group, are you looking at an achievement gap for everyone?
Through the chair, we're working through the gap of African American students and white students, and that is the primary focus that we're looking at. I think what this policy does is keep the integrity of the current work group and the problem solving that it's engaging in, continuing that specific process. I want to be clear, in my mind, this is not in reaction to the unitary status. This is not in reaction to anything that there's a pressing need to get it done, other than the fact that it needs to be a priority at all times. And if we can make that declaration the absolute strongest way, why would we not? So it keeps the integrity of the work group happening. This has been shared with the NAACP. The representative from the work group has provided positive feedback regarding it. So we're in a place to say this board has a high level of commitment to continuing and growing and expanding this body of work.
So why not just create an achievement gap oversight work group now, for now, apart from the work that you are doing in that other work group, so that you can address the achievement gap with all students district-wide, and then not make this one specific to the desegregation order?
Through the chair, I think this superintendent and any other superintendents work at the will of the board. And the reality, what I would do versus other superintendents would do, varies. But every superintendent will have to uphold policy as it is written. So if there's an opportunity to create policy that dictates the work that is a priority for the elected officials to ensure that every single member of our community is being provided quality education and we are eliminating gaps, then I think that's what we should do. But to give a level of comfort to you, Ms. Rosario, We do have a strong focus. It is part of our school improvement process where we're looking at subgroups that are underperforming and writing specific action steps to address them. Each of our secondary schools have an African-American Student Council, which gives voice to those individuals at specific schools. We're still driving and mining that work. We have seen some good foundational work be done in the last 2 years. But the truth of the reality is there's significant work to be done. And we need to protect that work in order to ensure that we're continuing to grow the entire community.
So if we keep that work group, I mean, obviously, we have no choice, where you're still working with the current work group that's in progress. That's going to continue to happen. So, board members, what about just removing everything here about desegregation and allowing the superintendent to begin addressing the achievement gap district-wide now, instead of until we reach unitary status?
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, first off, I think he's already doing that. Second off, I think the intent of this policy is to demonstrate ongoing commitment, not simply board policy to direct the superintendent, but what it communicates to the community about this board's priorities. I think while we may have been addressing this for some time, as you alluded to, I don't think we've done a great job. And I think that's part of the reason that we don't get as far as we want to. There is nothing in policy. It is the superintendent's commitment to stay focused on this issue, and he's done considerable work towards that. But there isn't something in policy that continually directs him to do that, and I can't imagine, personally, why we would not want to demonstrate to ourselves, to this district, to the people in it, and to the community our commitment to this issue and to closing the achievement gap. I don't understand any reason why, whether substantively or symbolically, we would not want to communicate that. So at this point, if this is on the consent agenda for tonight. If it's something you object to, feel free to pull it and we can vote on it. Otherwise, we will put it through on consent. But I think we can debate this all day long, and you object to it, some of us support it. We'll just put it to a vote tonight then. Mrs. Marenborg, you haven't spoken, so if there's anything you'd like to say about any of this.
Sure. Thank you. I think this shows a good faith. Good faith to something that this board and previous boards for years and years and years and years and years have been dealing with. And this shows good faith that we're not just dealing with it, we're moving forward to help kids. I appreciate the fact that we're going to be helping all kids, so I'm moving forward with the group. Making a policy instead of having a superintendent procedure shows that the board strongly supports the work that has been done towards unitary status. I think that if we don't have something now that we're looking forward in the future, let's say we get unitary status in September, then we're sitting there going, okay, now what? We're behind, the cart is now behind, or in front of the horse, now it's behind the horse, and now it's dragging way behind the horse. I'd rather have something there that we can tweak if we need to, versus not having something at all. So yes, I will be supporting this. Dr. Jones.
Just in summary, and thank you for your input. I've read every policy. I don't have it memorized, but take a look at how many policies in this book truly relate to student achievement. I couldn't give you the percentage, but it's not real high. And again, this is just something, unitary status, maybe we'll get it someday soon, maybe it'll take a year, 2 years, I don't know. But to me, it just says that this school board in this school district has the intent to move forward with this. Yes, I know we're working with our students, our ELL students. I know we're working with our Hispanic students and African American, our special needs students, economically disadvantaged. That's a subgroup, You take a look at all of those, and yeah, we're doing some improvements. But this just shows, to me, personally and professionally, for someone who's been watching this for 40 years here, that this school board will remain committed to student achievement in all areas.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for serving on this committee, but also bringing this forward and for the work that's been done with staff.
And
to
I
create
know we
this.
can't talk about the committee, but it is a really, really good group of people. We're working hard. We're going to continue to work hard, and I'm proud to be a member of it.
Okay, yeah, I have a hard time with something coming before us on the dais and changing it right then if you've already vetted and done all the work, so I appreciate the work. All right. Dr. Moore, anything else?
That exhausts the agenda, ma'am.
That does exhaust the agenda. It is 3:45. We are adjourned.